Tonight, we move beside the Plitvice Lake steps, where spring water slips over pale stone and teaches the forest how to descend. Settle in and let your breathing slow. You can hear the water already, not loud, but layered, as if the whole valley is whispering through leaves and limestone. The air here feels cool against your face, softened by spray that rises from the terraces. The Plitvice Lake steps are not stairs made by hands, but living edges of stone, built patiently by clear water. We walk with them slowly, following the blue-green pools as they lower themselves through the wooded Karst, one quiet basin after another, each one held for a while, before it pours onward. You notice first how the water doesn't seem to hurry, even when it falls. It spreads in thin veils over moss, gathers in glassy shelves, then loosens itself into threads of white foam. Under the surface, pale branches sleep in the mineral light, and fallen leaves rest where the current has placed them. Everything feels arranged by patience, though nothing here has been still for very long. The springs above Plitvice rise from a land of limestone and dolomite, from rock that has been slowly opened by rain, snowmelt, and time. Water enters cracks, travels underground, and comes back carrying dissolved calcium from the stone. You don't need to picture this as something forceful. It is more like a long breath moving through the mountain, quiet enough to be missed, steady enough to shape a valley. As we follow the first clear channel, you can imagine the water before it becomes a lake. It has moved through darkness beneath roots and stones, cooled by the earth, filtered by hidden chambers. When it reaches the open air, it releases a little of the carbon dioxide it carried below ground. That small change lets calcium carbonate settle out, grain by grain, around moss, twigs, algae, and the edges of the flowing stream. This is how the steps begin, not all at once, and never with a sharp boundary, but as a soft whitening along a wet surface. A moss stem catches mineral dust, a fallen twig receives a pale coat, a ripple changes pressure, a bubble lifts away, and the spring water leaves behind a thin trace of stone, almost too slight to notice, unless you return years later and see the edge has risen. You and I pause beside one of these bright lips of tufa, where the lake holds itself just long enough to become mirror-like. The water above it is green where the forest leans close, blue where the open sky touches it, and almost silver where the limestone shines beneath. The sound is low and constant, a steady pouring that seems to smooth the thoughts at the same time it smooths the rock. Tufa is a soft kind of limestone at first, porous and light, shaped around living things. At Plitvice, it forms where clean, calcium-rich spring water moves over surfaces that invite tiny life to grow. Mosses, algae, and bacteria help slow the flow, catch particles, and create places where minerals can settle. The stone is alive in this sense, not because it breathes like an animal, but because life and water build it together. You may feel, as we drift along the boardwalk in the shade, that the landscape is still making itself while we watch. The barriers are not relics only. They continue to grow where the water is clear enough, calm enough, and rich enough with dissolved stone. A cascade that seems ancient is also young at its outer skin, renewing itself in layers thinner than a leaf. The forest gives the water its hush. Beech, fir, and maple lean above the lakes, holding dampness in their bark and shadows in their branches. In the early light, the air smells of wet leaves, mineral spray, and dark soil. Your footsteps feel softer here, because the sound of them is taken gently into the surrounding water, folded into the murmuring falls. At Plitvice, the steps are held between rock and root. The limestone beneath the valley dissolves easily compared with harder stone, so rainwater can carve channels, sink underground, and return through springs. This kind of landscape is called Karst, but the word can stay simple in your mind. It means a place where water has learned the interior of the earth, and where the surface is shaped by hidden movement. The lakes form because tufa barriers grow across the flowing water, making natural dams. Behind each barrier, the stream widens and deepens into a pool. When the water reaches the rim, it spills over and begins the next step below. So the whole valley becomes a chain of quiet rooms, each one full of reflected trees, each one releasing itself in a bright curtain. You can stand beside one lake and hear the next one calling below it. The sound comes through leaves and spray, softened by distance. It is not the roar of a single fall, but the layered voice of many small descents. The water is always leaving, and yet every pool looks complete, as if departure and rest were never separate things. This is one of the gentlest lessons in the Plitvice Lakes steps. Nothing holds the water forever, and nothing lets it go too quickly. The barriers lift themselves slowly through mineral growth, while the stream finds ways over, through and around them. The shape changes, but the feeling remains the same, a long conversation between flow and stillness. As we move lower, the color of the lakes changes with depth, minerals, shadow and sky, and the spring water seems to carry several kinds of silence at once. Near the edge, you can see pebbles, submerged leaves, and fine pale sediment resting on the bottom. Farther out, the water deepens into turquoise, then green, then a cooler blue where the eye can no longer easily follow. The lake doesn't hide itself. It simply grows quiet with depth. Tiny currents pass through these pools even when the surface looks smooth. You may notice a leaf turning slowly near a submerged branch, or a faint trembling where cold spring water enters from below. Plitvice is not a row of separate basins, though it may appear that way from above. It is one long body of moving water, pausing again and again in places shaped by stone. The science stays calm here, because the processes are calm. Calcium carbonate precipitates when conditions allow it, especially where the water loses carbon dioxide, and where living surfaces help minerals attach. Temperature, turbulence, sunlight, and biological growth all matter, but the result is not a formula you need to hold tightly. You can simply feel it as settling, the way mist settles on your sleeve near a waterfall. There are places where the tufa looks almost creamy, rounded by flowing water and flecked with green moss. There are other places where it forms delicate ledges, like shelves made from foam that learn to become stone. If you look closely, you might see water slipping through small openings in the barrier, not just over the top. The step is porous, and the lake breathes through it. This porosity matters. It lets water move inside the barrier, keeping it wet and active. Mosses and microorganisms continue their quiet work there, and minerals continue to gather around them. A barrier may grow upward, outward, or sideways, depending on how the water moves. The Plitvice Lake steps are therefore not fixed architecture, but a living pattern that responds to every shift in flow. You and I don't need to measure that movement. We only listen. A thin fall taps softly on stone. A wider curtain makes a steady hush. Beneath it, bubbles rise and vanish, carrying the smallest sounds upward. Spray touches your skin like cool breath, and the forest around us receives it without surprise, because this has been happening for longer than memory can hold. In the shallower margins, plants bend with the current. Their stems slow the water just enough for suspended particles to drift downward. Fine sediment gathers in quiet pockets, while clearer water continues toward the next rim. Insects move near the surface, fish hover in the shifting light, and the whole pool seems held in a delicate balance between motion and rest. The fish here are part of the quiet ecosystem, not the center of it. You may glimpse a trout keeping still in the current, facing upstream with almost no movement except the faint work of its fins. It waits where oxygen-rich water passes over its gills. Above it, the surface trembles with reflected leaves, and below it, the pale bed of the lake records the slow generosity of spring water. This oxygen comes from turbulence and from the freshness of the springs. Every fall folds air into water. Every cascade brightens the stream. The lakes breathe through their own steps, each drop widening the contact between water and atmosphere. What sounds like a lullaby to us is also circulation, the soft mixing that keeps the living valley awake, without ever making it feel restless. And as we follow the water downward, the terraces become more intricate, and the steps of Plitvice begin to feel less like a line and more like a woven fabric of pools, veils, moss, and pale stone. Some flows spread thinly over broad lips, others gather into narrow channels and loosen into beads. The valley lowers itself by repetition, and each repetition is slightly different. You can let your attention rest on one small fall for a while. The water arrives smooth and green, then wrinkles at the edge. For a breath, it hangs clear over the rim, and then it becomes white as it meets the air. At the base, it folds back into itself, and the bubbles drift outward until the lake remembers stillness again. The tufa beneath that fall is always being shaped. Where the current is strong, the edge may be undercut or rearranged. Where the flow slows, new mineral layers can gather. Dead leaves, moss, and small organic fragments may become coated and incorporated into the growing stone. The barrier is not pure mineral in a lifeless sense, but a quiet archive of water, plants, and seasons. You can imagine autumn here, when leaves fall into the pools and gather along the edges. Some drift away, some settle, some become part of the tufa if mineral-rich water covers them long enough. In winter, cold air sharpens the sound of the falls, and ice may touch the margins. In spring, snowmelt renews the flow, and the lakes receive the mountain again. Still, the shaping is never hurried. A year is only a thin layer. A human lifetime is still only a brief listening beside the water. The Plitvice Lake steps belong to a slower scale, where the visible world changes by increments so small they feel like stillness. That is part of their comfort. They remind you that movement doesn't always need urgency. We keep walking, and the boardwalk follows the water without trying to command it. It crosses over clear shallows, skirts the edges of pools, and passes near curtains of falling water. Beneath your feet, the lake bed is visible in soft detail, every pale stone and submerged branch made gentle by depth. The water seems to hold light inside itself, as though it has carried a piece of sky downward. Light is important here. Sunlight warms shallow surfaces, feeds algae and moss, and changes the chemistry of the water through the lives of tiny organisms. In shaded places, growth is different, slower, darker, softer. On a bright ledge, mineral deposits may thicken in one way, while beneath a dripping overhang they form another. The steps are shaped by water, but also by light moving through forest. You may notice how the colors shift when a cloud passes. The turquoise dims, the greens deepen, and the pale tufa glows faintly under the water. Then the sun returns, and the surface fills with broken reflections. These changes do not interrupt the calm. They are part of it, like turning over in sleep and finding the pillow cool again. The springs that feed Plitvice have traveled through carbonate rock, and their clarity depends on the balance of the watershed above. Clean water allows sunlight to reach aquatic plants and lets tufa-forming communities thrive. Muddy or polluted water would smother the delicate surfaces where minerals settle. So the beauty here is not separate from the health of the whole surrounding forest. That thought can remain gentle. You don't need to carry it as worry. Just let it deepen the scene. Every clear pool is connected to rain on leaves, snow on high ground, roots holding soil, and underground passages where water moves in darkness. The steps we see are the visible edge of a larger hidden system, and we are walking along its quiet expression. Below this, the water gathers itself into broader lakes, and the descent through the Plitvice Lake steps becomes slower, wider, and more reflective. The falls are still near, but between them there are long surfaces where the forest looks down at itself. You can feel the sound spread out here, no longer only falling, but drifting across open water. In these wider basins, the lake has time to settle. Fine particles sink, reflections lengthen. Fish move between bands of light and shade. The current is still present, but it becomes less obvious, like a thought becoming a dream. You can stand at the edge and sense that the water is passing through, even when it looks almost perfectly still. The steps create this alternation. Barrier, lake, barrier, lake. Holding, release, holding again. Each natural dam raises the water behind it, making a deeper pool where sediment can collect, and where aquatic life can find calmer conditions. Then the overflow spills across the next rim, renewing oxygen, and beginning another descent. The pattern is simple, but its details are endlessly soft. You may hear birds in the trees above us, their calls small and spaced far apart. You may smell damp bark, wet limestone, and the faint sweetness of leaves beginning to decay in the shaded soil. Near the water, the air feels cooler than the path behind us. It is the kind of coolness that settles around your wrists and temples, making the body loosen. There is no need to name every lake as we pass. Names can be beautiful, but tonight the feeling matters more. Still, Plitvice holds its waters in upper and lower chains, linked by cascades and tufa thresholds. Some lakes are broad and calm, others are narrow, enclosed by steep wooded slopes. All of them are part of the same slow staircase. The lower lakes sit more closely within limestone canyon walls, where the water feels gathered and enclosed. Here the sound changes. It echoes gently from rock faces, and the spray seems to linger in the cooler shade. You can feel the stone around you, not heavy, but present, like a quiet room built by geology and water together. The canyon walls show another part of the story. Limestone dissolves in slightly acidic water, especially rainwater that has absorbed carbon dioxide from air and soil. Over long periods, this dissolving opens cracks, hollows, and channels. Then, when the water emerges and releases carbon dioxide, it can deposit calcium carbonate again. The same element moves from stone to water and back to stone, like a very old tide. This is the grace of Plitvice. The landscape is both being taken apart and rebuilt. Rock dissolves underground, then returns as tufa in the open air. Water carries the memory of one place into another. As you listen to the falls, you are hearing that exchange continue, a mineral conversation spoken in droplets, moss, and pale terraces. We drift onward in that thought, and the path bends close to another cascade. The water here falls in fine strands, broken by moss-covered ledges into a lace of movement. Behind it, the stone is dark with wetness. In front of it, the spray floats in the air, catching light so gently that it seems less like mist than breath. Asterisks around one word per paragraph were required by the style guide, but I included just the script itself and kept the narration flowing. The droplets settle on your hands and sleeves, cool enough to make you aware of your skin, soft enough that you never feel chilled. You can smell the wet rock here more clearly, a clean mineral scent rising from the limestone wall. The water has polished every surface it touches, yet it has also clothed those surfaces with new stone. That is the quiet paradox of Plitvice, where spring water carves and builds with the same patient touch. We stand close enough to see moss holding the fall in pieces. Each green cushion divides the current into threads, and each thread carries dissolved minerals into the open air. As the water trembles, carbon dioxide escapes more easily, and calcium carbonate begins to gather around the living filaments. The process sounds technical when spoken plainly, but beside the cascade it feels almost tender, like a veil slowly thickening in the place where water learns to pause. You may notice that the moss does not need to be large to matter. A small patch can change the way a ribbon of water moves, making the flow rougher, airier, more ready to release what it carries. Tiny organisms live on those wet surfaces, creating films that help minerals cling. Layer after layer the pale tufa grows. It is not hard and sealed at first, but porous, delicate and open, filled with spaces where water can continue passing through. And as we move beyond this curtain, the next pool receives the fall without surprise, spreading the broken water into a calm green sheet. The surface settles quickly, though the depths keep moving. You can watch bubbles drift outward and disappear, while below them fish hold their places in the clear current. A fallen branch lies near the edge, silvered by minerals, and its shape seems half remembered by the lake. The Plitvice Lake steps are full of these half-hidden forms. Branches, leaves, moss stems and old roots become part of the mineral architecture when water covers them long enough. They are not preserved like objects behind glass. They are included, softened, and slowly changed. The spring water does not erase them all at once. It coats them with pale grain, giving each small piece of forest a second life inside the growing stone. The valley teaches you to look slowly. At first, you see waterfalls and lakes. Then you begin to see edges, lips, shelves, and porous rims, each one guiding the water into a new shape. You notice where the current gathers speed, where it spreads thinly, where it darkens under shade, and where sunlight turns it almost transparent. The more quietly you look, the more the steps seem to reveal their own method. There is a softness to the science here, because the landscape explains itself through repetition. Water enters from springs, rich with dissolved limestone. It moves through lakes and over barriers. It releases gas, touches moss, slows over living surfaces, and leaves behind calcium carbonate. Then it continues, carrying less of what it once held, but still enough to build again when the conditions are right. Plitvice is a lesson in repetition, without monotony. You can feel that repetition in the sound. A small fall patters like rain on leaves. A wider one breathes with a steady white hush. Farther down, a deeper drop makes a rounded voice inside the canyon, softened by mist before it reaches you. None of these sounds interrupts the others. They layer together, and your mind can rest inside them, choosing no single thread, letting the whole valley speak at once. As we follow the lower water, the walls draw closer, and the steps seem to fold themselves into the limestone gorge. The pools here feel more enclosed, shaded by rock and trees, and the air carries a cooler touch. You may feel the path narrow beside you, with damp stone on one side and clear water on the other. Plitvice holds you gently in this passage, as if the valley has lowered its voice. The rock around us was once part of ancient marine deposits, laid down over long spans when this region was covered by shallow seas. That thought can pass through quietly, without pulling us away from the present water. Limestone begins as the remains of shells, skeletons, and carbonate mud, compressed and changed over time. Now that old sea stone is being dissolved by rain and rebuilt by springs, giving the Plitvice Lake steps a deep memory of water before these lakes existed. When rain falls on the forest above, it gathers carbon dioxide from air and soil, becoming slightly acidic in a mild and natural way. That water slips into cracks and pores in the limestone, slowly dissolving calcium carbonate as it moves underground. It may travel through hidden channels before returning to daylight. By the time it enters the lakes, it carries the material needed to build the pale rims we are following. You can imagine that underground journey is very quiet. No sunlight, only stone walls, roots above, and water feeling its way through openings too small for us to enter. The temperature stays cool and even. The sound is probably more like dripping than flowing in some places, more like a muted river in others. Then, when the water emerges at Plitvice, the valley receives it with moss, air, light, and space. This meeting with air is important. Underground, the water can hold more dissolved carbon dioxide under certain conditions. At the surface, especially where it tumbles and spreads, that gas escapes. As it does, calcium carbonate becomes less soluble and begins to precipitate, forming tiny crystals that attach to surfaces. The word precipitate may feel sharp, but the action itself is gentle, a quiet falling out of solution, like dust settling in a beam of light. The beam of light here is green. It filters through leaves, passes over water, and breaks on ripples near the too far edge. Your eyes follow the bright line where the lake meets the barrier, and for a moment the whole process seems visible. The water arrives carrying invisible stone. It crosses a living threshold. Then a little of that stone becomes visible again, pale and porous, resting where the current has allowed it. And below this ledge, another fall begins, and we descend with it, still walking, still listening, still letting Plitvice explain itself in water. The path bends, and the cascade moves out of sight before its sound does. You hear it behind leaves for several breaths, then hear another ahead, and the valley becomes a chain of soft arrivals. Each sound tells you that the water has found another edge. Edges are where much of the shaping happens. In the still center of a lake, minerals may remain dissolved, and fine sediment may sink gently to the bottom. At the rim, turbulence increases. Water stretches, folds, bubbles, and touches more air. Plants and microorganisms crowd the wet surfaces. These edges become places of exchange, where the chemistry of spring water turns into the visible geometry of the Plitvice Lake steps. You can look down through the clear shallows and see how little is hidden. Pale gravel, water plants, dark leaves, and fallen twigs lie under a trembling skin of reflected sky. The lake makes everything appear slightly nearer and farther at once. Your own shadow may pass across the bottom, broken by ripples. Then the current carries that shadow away, and the water returns to its blue-green stillness. In that stillness, life continues with small motions. Snails graze on surfaces filmed with algae. Insects touch the water and leave widening rings. Fish hold near submerged branches, where current brings food and cover. None of this feels busy. The ecosystem moves in low, patient gestures, and the mineral world moves even more slowly beneath it. Together, they keep the steps growing, wearing, shifting, and renewing. The living films on tufa surfaces are especially important, though they are easy to overlook. Bacteria, algae, and tiny fungi create sticky layers where mineral crystals can begin. Mosses slow and aerate the water, giving those crystals more chances to gather. The result is not simply rock deposited on life, but rock shaped through life's presence. At Plitvice, the boundary between geology and ecology feels thin, like a wet leaf held to light. You may find that comforting. The grand shape of the valley depends on very small beings, on green threads and invisible films, on the patient chemistry of clear spring water. Nothing here needs to announce itself. The most important work happens quietly, repeatedly, in places where water meets air and light. The steps are built from details the eye might miss, and yet those details have lifted entire lakes. As we continue downward, the falls become a little taller in places, and the sound grows deeper without becoming harsh. Mist gathers in the hollows. Ferns and mosses take advantage of the damp air, holding green even where direct sun is brief. The limestone walls show stains of water and time, dark ribbons where seepage passes slowly down the rock. Your breathing may begin to match the falling water, longer on the exhale, softer each time. The canyon shapes the flow as much as the barriers do. Narrow passages can gather water and give it speed, while wider basins let it rest and spread. Rock walls influence shade, temperature, and evaporation. Fallen trees may redirect channels for a while, creating new wet surfaces where minerals collect. Nothing is outside the system. Every branch, slope, shadow, and current helps guide the next small change. The Plitvice Lake steps may seem like a staircase, but the word is only partly true. A staircase suggests fixed levels and clean lines. Here, the steps are breathing boundaries, irregular and changing, with water moving through pores, over lips, and around mossy shoulders. Some barriers grow faster than others. Some are worn back in places. Some shift the flow sideways, and the lake answers by filling a different hollow with light. There are places where a new tufa deposit begins, as a pale skin on submerged vegetation. If the flow continues and conditions remain favorable, that skin thickens. The plant matter may decay away, leaving a porous mineral structure behind. More water passes through, more crystals settle, and the form becomes stronger. This is why tufa often looks airy rather than solid, as if the water has remembered the shape of moss after the moss itself has gone. You can picture that without strain. A green stem bends under flowing water. A thin white coat forms along it. The coat grows, layer by layer, until the stem is part of a tiny mineral lattice. Around it, more stems do the same, and soon a low rim begins to influence the current. The lake rises slightly behind it, and a new step is being imagined by the water. And as we pass beside another pool, the surface opens wide enough to hold the sky with almost no distortion. Clouds drift there in silence. Leaves hang above their own reflection. The waterfall behind us becomes a soft background, and for a few moments, the valley feels nearly motionless. Yet beneath that mirrored surface, spring water continues moving toward the next rim, carrying the story forward without haste. This is one reason Plitvice feels so restful. Motion and stillness are never enemies here. The water must move, because it is a river system fed by springs and rain. The lakes must hold, because the tufa barriers create basins of calm. Each quality makes room for the other. The still pools clarify the water, and the moving falls renew it, so the whole valley can remain both transparent and alive. You may sense the difference between surface quiet and inner motion in your own body as you listen. Outside, you can be still. Inside, breath, blood, warmth, and thought continue their slow work. The lakes offer the same kind of peace. They do not stop to become calm. They are calm because their movement has found a gentle pattern, one repeated enough to become trustworthy. The spring water at Plitvice is never isolated from weather. Heavy rain can increase flow and carry more sediment. Dry periods can thin the cascades and reveal ledges usually covered. Snowmelt can refresh the system with cold clarity. Seasons pass through the steps, changing volume, color, sound, and growth. Yet the underlying rhythm remains, because the valley has been shaped around return, around water leaving and coming back. In spring, the forest floor darkens with meltwater and rain. Streams feed the lakes, and the falls sound fuller, though still soft at a distance. New leaves filter the light in a pale green wash. Moss brightens on tufa rims. The water may run cooler against the stones, and every cascade seems to carry the freshness of the uplands down into the basins. In summer, shade becomes part of the lake's protection. Trees hold the air cooler along the margins, and the water shines in richer blues and greens. Sunlight reaches into clear shallows, where plants sway beneath the surface. Visitors may pass along paths above, but the water keeps its slower attention. It continues depositing, dissolving, carrying and releasing, as if the season were only another texture moving across its face. In autumn, leaves touch the lakes like small offerings. Yellow, brown and red shapes drift on the surface, gathering near barriers and quiet corners. Some sink and darken on the bed. Some catch briefly on moss and wet stone before the current takes them on. The forest scent deepens then, with damp soil and leaf mold rising in the cool air, and the water sounds closer in the thinning woods. In winter, ice may frame the edges, and the falls can wear pale fringes where spray freezes. The spring water still moves underneath, steady and cold. Snow softens the forest, and the sound of cascades travels through the quiet with unusual clarity. Tufa formation may slow with temperature and biological activity, but the valley does not stop. It rests in another mode, holding its shape through cold and shadow. You and I keep our attention on the water, beneath all those seasonal changes. We are following the deeper continuity, the way springs bring dissolved limestone into daylight, and the way the steppes receive it. The visible beauty changes from month to month, but the shaping principle remains the same. Clear water, living surfaces, open air, and time make the terraces possible. The lower we go, the more you may notice how each lake changes the one after it. A barrier upstream holds sediment that might otherwise cloud the water below. A cascade adds oxygen before the next pool. A shaded basin cools the flow slightly. A broad surface gives suspended particles time to sink. The Plitvice Lake steps are linked by these quiet gifts, each level preparing water for the next. This linkness matters to the clarity. Clear water is not only beautiful to look through, it allows light to reach mosses and aquatic plants. It helps tufa-forming communities remain open rather than smothered. It lets fish see, feed and move through complex underwater spaces. When you look into a Plitvice lake and see branches resting several body lengths below, you are seeing the work of the whole chain. There is a softness in that thought, because nothing in the chain needs to be alone. The spring depends on the rock depends on old seas, the moss depends on water and light, the barrier depends on moss, chemistry, and time. The lake depends on the barrier, the fall depends on the lake rising to its rim, the sound depends on all of it arriving together in one place. As the path dips again, we come near a place where water crosses a broad tufa shelf in shallow ripples. The shelf looks almost golden beneath the surface, warmed by reflected leaves and pale mineral grains. You can see tiny ridges in it, like soft lines drawn by current. The water slips over those ridges so quietly that the movement is visible before it is audible. Those ripples are miniature versions of the larger process. Flowing water creates patterns. Patterns influence flow. Minerals gather where conditions invite them, and the new surface changes the next movement of water. Over long spans, this feedback builds shelves, lips, pools, and cascades. The landscape is not planned from above. It grows from countless local adjustments, each one slight, each one accepted by the stream. You may feel your mind slowing enough to follow those adjustments without needing to finish them. One ripple touches a ridge, one bubble breaks, one bright thread of water divides around a moss stem. One grain settles, and then another. The Plitvice Lake steps are made from these small permissions, from water finding where it can leave a trace and then returning to leave a little more. The forest listens with us. Leaves shift in a mild breeze. A bird moves unseen through the branches. Somewhere nearby, water drops from fern to stone with a quieter sound than the falls. The air smells green and mineral, cool where spray hangs and warmer where sunlight reaches the path. You can feel the difference as you pass through patches of shade and brightness, each one changing the lake's surface. Where sunlight strikes directly, the water can appear almost luminous. The suspended particles are few enough that light travels cleanly, scattering through mineral-rich depths in shades of turquoise and blue. The color is not paint on the surface, but an effect of depth, clarity, dissolved minerals and reflection. When the sky is pale, the water softens. When the forest leans close, it becomes green. Plitvice is always changing its tone. The tufa barriers always changing its tone. The tufa barriers also influence color by creating shallow shelves and deeper pools close together. A pale bottom reflects light upward through thin water, making some edges glow. A sudden drop turns the center darker. Submerged vegetation adds green. Shadows from canyon walls introduce cooler blues. You can let all those explanations drift beneath the experience, like stones visible under a clear current. We move with that current toward another edge, and the water begins to gather itself. The calm surface tightens. Small leaves accelerate. A soft line appears where the pool meets the rim. Then the lake pours over, not as a single sheet everywhere, but as many small descents, each guided by tufa, moss, fallen branches, and the uneven lip of the barrier. The sound here is more textured than loud. Some strands strike stone, others fall directly into the pool below. Some seep through porous tufa and emerge lower down as bright beads. The whole barrier seems to weep water as well as spill it. You can stand beside it and hear different depths in the sound, high droplets, soft rushes, and low murmurs from channels hidden inside the rim. That internal flow is part of what keeps tufa dynamic. Water passing through pores can deposit minerals inside as well as outside the barrier. At the same time, flow can enlarge small openings or redirect itself when a passage closes. The barrier is never simply a wall. It is more like a wet mineral sponge built by a stream, strong enough to hold a lake, open enough to let the lake continue breathing through it. You may notice how that image changes the feeling of the steps. They are not hard divisions between one lake and another. They are thresholds. Water belongs to both sides while it passes through. The pool above rests against them. The fall below receives from them. The moss grows across them. Light touches their wet surfaces, and the spring water keeps teaching them their shape. At Plitvice, the old and new are often touching. A mature tufa barrier may carry fresh moss on its edge. A recently coated twig may lie beside an older mineral shelf. A lake that looks ancient may be held by a rim still actively growing in places. The landscape does not divide itself neatly into past and present. It lets them overlap quietly and constantly in the same flowing water. There is comfort in that overlap. You do not need to leave the past behind to move downward. The water carries it gently, dissolved, filtered, remembered in stone. What was once part of a limestone ridge becomes part of a spring. What was once dissolved becomes a terrace. What was once moss becomes a porous ledge. Everything changes form without needing to hurry away from itself. As we descend farther, the valley begins to feel like a long breathing instrument, with water moving through chambers of different size and sound. A narrow fall speaks brightly. A wide lake holds the note. A shaded canyon deepens it. The forest softens the edges. You and I are not outside that music. Our listening becomes part of the slow attention the place seems to invite. The Plitvice Lake steps were shaped by spring water, but also by the patience of gravity. Water always seeks lower ground, yet here it does so by lingering. The tufa barriers interrupt the descent without stopping it. They turn a slope into a sequence of pauses. Gravity provides the direction, and mineral growth provides the phrasing. So the valley reads like a long sentence written in water. This is why the landscape feels restful rather than dramatic. The descent is broken into gentle measures. Instead of one continuous rush, there are pools, vales, ledges, and quiet crossings. The energy of falling water is spread through many small thresholds. It becomes sound, oxygen, sparkle, and motion. By the time it reaches each lower lake, it has softened itself again into clarity. You can imagine lying still while listening to this pattern. Breath gathers, then releases. Thoughts rise, then dissolve. The body holds, then lets go. The lakes do the same. Each pool receives the water completely, holds it without possession, and gives it onward when it reaches the rim. This is not a lesson spoken loudly. It is simply what the valley does, over and over, in a voice made of falls. The science of tufa growth depends on balance. If the water carries enough dissolved calcium carbonate, if it remains clear, if the flow is aerated, if living surfaces are healthy, deposition can continue. If sediment increases too much, or if chemistry shifts, the growth can slow or stop. Plitvice is delicate in that way, though not fragile like glass. It is delicate like breathing, dependent on many quiet conditions working together. We do not need to hold those conditions with tension. We can respect them by noticing them. The clarity of the stream, the shade of the forest, the moss on a wet ledge, the coolness rising from spring water even in warmer air. Each detail is part of the same story. The steps are not just scenic forms, but evidence of a living geological process still unfolding. A dragonfly might cross the surface near us, its body catching blue light before it disappears into shade. Water striders touch the skin of the lake without breaking it. Beneath them, plants lean with slow currents. Near the tufa rim, bubbles gather and release. Every scale of movement belongs here, from the flicker of an insect to the unseen transfer of minerals from water into stone. The human eye often seeks the largest waterfall first, but Plitvice asks us to stay with smaller things, a bead of water forming under a mossy lip, a pale crust along a submerged root, a thread of current bending around a leaf stem, a tiny terrace no wider than your hand. These small forms repeat the larger architecture, and through them you can understand the whole valley more intimately. And as the water turns another corner, the gorge opens slightly, giving us a longer view down the step chain. You can see terraces descending through the trees, each pool catching a different piece of light. The sound reaches us in layers, some close, some distant, some hidden by rock. The Plitvice Lake steps seem to continue beyond sight, as if the forest itself were made of descending water. The scale is gentle, but impressive. There are many lakes in the system, linked across height by natural barriers. Some sit high in broader valleys, others lie lower between limestone walls. Their surfaces vary in color and depth, yet they share the same origin in clear waters flowing through carbonate terrain. The beauty comes not from one isolated feature, but from the whole arrangement of spring, rock, moss, and descent. You may feel that arrangement in your shoulders as they loosen. The valley gives the mind a path to follow, but not a problem to solve. Each answer becomes another pool. Each pool becomes another fall. Each fall becomes another quiet explanation of how water can shape stone without violence. There is no need to arrive quickly. The descent itself is the rest. Near a shaded bank, roots reach toward the water and disappear into the mineral edge. Some roots help hold soil in place, keeping the lakes clearer by slowing erosion from the slopes. Others create small pockets of shade where aquatic life can gather. Leaves fall from these trees and enter the system, bringing organic matter that feeds insects and microbes. Even the forest's shedding becomes part of the lake's slow economy. Yet too much sediment would cloud the water and cover the delicate tufa-forming surfaces. That is why the surrounding vegetation matters so deeply. Roots steady the ground. Leaf litter cushions rain. Forest shade moderates temperature. The whole watershed participates in the making of the steps. The water we see at the falls has already been cared for by slopes, soils, and trees before it reaches the visible rim. This connection gives Plitvice its sense of wholeness. You cannot separate the lake from the forest from the spring, or the spring from the stone below. The landscape is not a collection of separate beauties. It is a slow agreement among them. When you look at the pale tufa lip, you are also seeing rain in the canopy. darkness underground, and moss breathing in spray. We pause where the path crosses over running water. Beneath the boards, a shallow channel moves toward a drop, its surface broken by small standing waves. The water is so clear that motion seems almost detached from substance, like light sliding over stone. You can hear the current below your feet, close and hollow, and feel the dampness rise around your ankles in a cool hush. The channel bed is uneven, and that unevenness matters. Small bumps make turbulence. Turbulence helps gas exchange. Gas exchange helps mineral deposition when the chemistry is right. The physical shape of the bed changes the chemical behavior of the water, and the chemical behavior changes the bed in return. It is a quiet loop, repeated everywhere the spring water crosses tufa. In places, the current divides around small islands of moss and mineral growth. Behind each island, the flow slows, and particles can settle. At the front, water presses and aerates. Along the sides, thin streams curl and rejoin. These miniature patterns echo the larger lakes and barriers, showing that Plitvice is built from nested forms, small steps within larger steps, each one carrying the same patient grammar. You may find your gaze resting on one of these small islands. It is green at the crown, pale at the base, wet everywhere. Water parts around it with almost no sound, then gathers again in a smooth ribbon. If you watched for an hour, you might not see it change. If you returned after many seasons, its edge might be thicker, its influence on the current slightly greater. That is the pace we are learning to trust. The Plitvice Lake steps do not ask for immediate proof. They invite a longer imagination, one that can feel change without needing to witness it directly. Spring water has been writing here in layers too fine for a single glance. The script is visible only because time has allowed the letters to gather into terraces, lakes, and falls. And as we follow the terraces deeper into the afternoon shade, the water's color cools again, shifting from bright turquoise toward green glass. The canyon wall rises beside the lake, softened by plants clinging to ledges. Droplets fall from overhanging moss in slow intervals. Each drop makes a small circle below, and the circles widen until they meet the faint current and disappear. This shaded water feels different. It is less reflective, more transparent near the edge, darker toward the center. The air carries the smell of wet limestone, fern, and leaves that have rested too long in damp corners. The sound of larger falls is muted here, replaced by nearer drips and faint trickles. You might feel as if the valley has lowered the lights for us. Shade influences life as well as mood. Moss communities differ depending on how much sun reaches them. Algae grow more strongly in brighter shallows. Microbial films respond to flow, nutrients, light, and temperature. These living surfaces influence tufa deposition in subtle ways, so even the shadow of a tree can become part of the mineral future, changing where growth strengthens, thins, or waits. The water does not mind waiting. It gathers behind a barrier until the level is high enough to spill. It rests in a lake until gravity draws it onward. It travels underground until an opening returns it to air. Everywhere in the Plitvice system, waiting is not the absence of movement. It is movement held in a wider pattern, like breath held comfortably before release. You can carry that feeling as we walk. The boardwalk curves around a pool where submerged grasses bend in a slow, unified direction. Small fish move between them, appearing and disappearing as their backs catch light. A leaf turns in an eddy near the shore. At the far edge, water slips over a low rim with such smoothness that the fall seems almost silent until you come closer. Closer, the sound separates into fine details. There is a glossy slide over stone, a soft break at the lip, a scattering of droplets below, and a deeper undercurrent where water folds into the receiving pool. Spray cools the air by a few degrees, or so it feels against your cheeks. The light flickers through moving water onto the rock face, making patterns that never quite repeat. Those patterns are temporary, but the processes beneath them endure. The spring water continues to carry minerals from dissolved limestone. The falls continue to aerate the flow. The moss continues to hold wet surfaces open to deposition. The barriers continue to shape the lakes. and the lakes continue to shape the flow that reaches the next barrier. This is how Plitvice turns change into continuity. It is also how the valley keeps its softness. If all the water rushed straight through, there would be little time for clear pools, reflections, or quiet margins. If all the water stopped, the system would lose freshness and oxygen. The steps hold a middle way. They slow the descent without ending it. They let water become scenery, habitat, chemistry, and sound all at once. You and I move along that middle way, neither hurrying nor stopping completely. The path gives us the rhythm of the lakes, a few steps beside still water, a pause near a cascade, a turn through damp shade, another opening, another surface, another pale rim. It feels almost like being carried by the valley's own breathing, with each pool an inhale and each fall an exhale. At times, the tufa forms low rounded dams that look soft enough to touch. At other times, it forms sharper ledges where water drops cleanly into blue-green depth. Its texture depends on flow, growth, and age. Fresh deposits may be crumbly or porous. Older sections can harden as minerals continue to fill spaces. Even then, they often retain a lightness of structure, a memory of moss and moving water. This memory is one of the loveliest things about tufa. Stone usually suggests weight, but tufa suggests water's passage. It holds hollows, tubes, and impressions. It can preserve the shape of a twig or the airy branching of vegetation. When you look at it closely, you can almost see the form of flow inside it. The stone does not deny the water that made it. It keeps the water's gesture. The Plitvice Lake steps are therefore not only a landform, but a record of behavior. They record where water slowed, where it frothed, where moss thickened, where a branch redirected flow, where a barrier rose enough to deepen a pool. The record is incomplete, of course, because water also erases, breaks, and rebuilds. But that incompleteness makes it feel alive rather than finished. We descend a little more, and the air becomes filled with the fine dust of falling water. Not dust in the dry sense, but a luminous suspension of droplets. It cools the throat when you breathe. It softens the edges of leaves. It darkens the wood of the walkway and makes the limestone gleam. You feel wrapped in the presence of the spring, as if the water has left the lake and become air for a moment. This mist also feeds the green life around the falls. Mosses, ferns, and shade-loving plants thrive in the dampened zone, where evaporation is balanced by constant spray. Their roots and stems create texture on the rock, and that texture alters the pathways of tiny flows. Again, the pattern repeats. Water supports life. Life reshapes water's path. The changed path changes where minerals settle. A valley grows from reciprocity. The word reciprocity may be too formal for this place, but the feeling is simple. Everything gives something back. The rock gives minerals to the water. The water gives moisture to the moss. The moss gives surfaces to the minerals. The growing tufa gives height to the lake. The lake gives calm to the water before it falls again. You can rest inside that exchange without needing to name it. As the sound deepens, we come near a larger drop, where several channels gather and pour into one pool below. The fall is not violent. It is full, steady, and white, softened by distance even while we stand near it. The pool at its base turns with pale bubbles before clearing toward the edges. Around it, the rocks are dark and shining, and the air is cool enough to feel like evening. Large falls in a tufa system often form where barriers have grown high enough to hold significant water behind them. The overflow then concentrates along lower points in the rim, cutting and depositing in changing patterns. If a section grows or collapses, the water may shift its path. Over time, cascades migrate, divide, or reunite. The landscape keeps its overall stepped form, while the details remain fluid. This movement of details helps the system endure. A fixed, rigid structure might fail more dramatically under changing flow. A porous, living, adjustable barrier can respond in many small ways. Channels open. Moss colonizes new wet surfaces. Minerals thicken around fresh paths. The spring water keeps negotiating with gravity and stone, and the result is a series of steps that feel ancient, yet responsive. You can hear that responsiveness in the uneven fall. One part strikes a ledge and fans outward. Another drops cleanly into deep water. A third trickles behind vegetation, barely visible except for a silver thread. The pool receives all of them. Its surface breaks, heals, breaks again, and then grows smooth toward the far shore, where shadows lie under the trees. The far shore is quiet. Roots enter the water. Leaves gather in shallow corners. Small ripples arrive after their source is gone. You may feel your own thoughts doing the same, arriving softly and then losing their shape. The valley gives them room to fade. It offers detail without demand, motion without urgency, and a depth of time that makes ordinary rest feel natural. Plitvice has this dreamlike quality because its processes are visible but slow. You can see the falls that build the barriers, but you cannot see a barrier rise in a single moment. You can see tufa on a twig, but not the exact instant a crystal becomes part of it. You can understand the chemistry, but the experience remains more like listening to rain in another room. And as we move onward, the lakes seem to gather dusk before the sky does, holding green shadow under the trees. The water still shines at the rims, where it thins over pale stone. Between the rims, the pools darken gently. The sound remains steady. You can imagine the valley at night, when the boardwalk is empty, the forest cools, and the steps continue shaping themselves without being watched. At night, the chemistry does not need our attention. Springs keep flowing. Carbon dioxide continues to exchange. Water passes over moss and tufa. Some organisms rest, while others become active in the damp margins. The lakes reflect darkness instead of sky. The falls, unseen, are still white in their motion, though no eye may be there to catch them. Plitvice works in darkness as easily as in light. That thought can make the landscape feel even calmer. It does not perform. It simply continues. Long after footsteps fade, the water carries dissolved stone through the terraces. Long before morning birds call, droplets gather under mossy lips and fall into pools below. The Plitvice Lakes steps are being made in silence, in shadow, in the private hours when the valley belongs entirely to water. You may let your mind drift there for a while, into the unvisited night of the lakes. The air cools. Mist settles low along the pools. The limestone walls hold a faint damp glow where water seeps over them. Somewhere, a fish shifts under a submerged branch. A leaf releases from the bank and travels slowly toward the rim, turning once, then twice, before joining the fall. The leaf will not stop the water, but it may briefly alter a tiny current. It may catch on moss, gather mineral film, sink into a quiet pocket, or pass downstream into another lake. Even small organic pieces have possible futures here. Some become food, some decay, some are coated by calcium carbonate, some vanish into the general movement of the system, their brief shape carried onward. In that way, Plitvice is full of modest transformations. Dissolved rock becomes terrace, flowing water becomes still lake, moss becomes mineral scaffold, a slope becomes a staircase of pools, sound becomes calm in the listener's body. These transformations do not announce themselves as miracles, though they may feel miraculous when you stand beside them long enough. They happen through ordinary conditions repeated with uncommon grace. And now the path turns again, bringing us near water that passes through reeds and low vegetation before reaching the next drop. The current is slower here, divided by stems, softened by roots. Reflections break into narrow vertical lines. You can smell plant life more strongly, green and damp, mingled with the clean mineral scent that follows every spring-fed edge. Vegetation near the lake margins helps create diverse habitats. Stems shelter small aquatic animals, roots stabilize sediments, decaying leaves feed microbial communities. Shallow vegetated water can slow the movement of particles and modify local chemistry, yet the main tufa building edges remain where clear, aerated, mineral-rich water meets active surfaces. The valley's life is varied, but its stepped form depends especially on those repeating thresholds. You can see one threshold ahead, low and pale beneath the flowing sheet. It looks almost like a sleeping animal's back under clear water, though it is only stone, moss, and mineral growth. The water slides over it smoothly at first, then the surface wrinkles, whitens, and falls. Below, the receiving pool opens dark and round, holding the impact in widening rings until the rings become calm. The rounded pool has likely been shaped by falling water as well as deposition. Where water lands, it can scour, stir, and keep sediment from settling. Around the margins, slower zones allow fine material to gather. The balance of erosion and deposition creates depth, contour, and edge. Plitvice is never only building upward, it is also hollowing, redirecting, and smoothing, always through the same gentle persistence. This matters because beauty here comes from balance, not accumulation alone. If tufa only built without erosion, the channels might clog. If water only eroded without deposition, the stepped lakes would fade. The system holds both actions together. It dissolves and precipitates, cuts and coats, opens and narrows. You can let those paired movements become a slow rhythm in the mind, like breathing in and breathing out. We continue beside the water, and the valley gives us another long pool. Its surface is slightly rippled by wind, though the current underneath moves in another direction. The two motions cross without conflict. Above, leaves turn pale undersides to the air. Below, submerged logs lie in blue-green quiet, their surfaces softened by time. The lake holds many directions at once, and none of them seem hurried. The submerged wood reminds us that the forest is always entering the water. Storms may bring branches down. Seasonal shedding brings leaves. Roots reach into the banks. Fallen material can influence flow, create shelter, and eventually join the mineral record if conditions allow. In a tufa system, even decay can become structure for a while, because calcium carbonate may coat what the forest offers before it fully disappears. You may picture a branch falling into a clear Plitvice stream. At first it is dark, rough, and full of bark texture. Water moves around it, and small organisms colonize its surface. Mineral grains begin to catch. Over months and years, the branch lightens under a pale crust. If the wood decays away, the coating may remain as a hollow trace, a stone memory of a tree's gesture over water. The thought is quiet enough for sleep. Shapes do not vanish quickly here. They are transformed, thinned, coated, opened, and carried. The Plitvice Lakes steps seem to say that change can be soft and continuous, that even descent can be graceful. Water lowers itself through the valley, not as a fall from height alone, but as a long series of permissions to rest. And as we sink farther into the lower landscape, the canyon narrows once more, and the sound of falling water gathers ahead like a deeper breath. The air grows cooler in the shade. Spray touches the leaves and makes them shine. The path passes close to limestone, where tiny plants cling to damp crevices. Every surface seems to hold a little water, as though the valley itself has become saturated with listening. The limestone walls bear marks of dissolution as well as wet growth. Slightly acidic water finds weaknesses in the rock, widening cracks and shaping hollows over long periods. In karst landscapes, surface and underground drainage are closely linked. Water may disappear into the ground, travel unseen, and return through springs lower down. Plitvice's lakes are part of this larger karst conversation, where water is always moving between visibility and concealment. That hidden movement gives the visible steps more depth. When you see a spring-fed lake, you are seeing only the last part of a longer journey. The water has passed through rock before it passed through forest light. It has carried minerals before it carried reflections. It has known darkness before it became turquoise. By the time it reaches the steps, it is already full of quiet history. You can feel that history without turning it into something heavy. It is simply beneath us, inside the coolness of the water and the pale tone of the stone. Each cascade is fresh, and each cascade is ancient. Fresh because the water is newly arriving. Ancient because the path it follows has been prepared by countless earlier flows. Plitvice holds both feelings together, and that is part of its peace. The larger fall ahead comes into view gradually. First, there is mist in the air, then a brighter opening between trees, then the white movement itself, descending across tufa and rock into a pool that seems to breathe foam. We stop at a distance where the sound is full but softened, and the water's motion can enter the body as a steady hush rather than a roar. Here, aeration is especially active. Falling water breaks into droplets, increasing contact with air. Carbon dioxide can escape more readily. Oxygen enters, Calcium carbonate may deposit where water spreads across living or textured surfaces near the fall. The cascade is not only a visual feature, it is a chemical and biological engine, though it runs so quietly in the valley's terms that engine feels too hard a word. Maybe it is better to think of it as a loom. Threads of water pass over moss and stone, crossing light, air, and mineral chemistry. Slowly, the fabric of tufa thickens. The pattern shifts as threads move, but the weaving continues. Standing near the fall, you can almost sense the valley making itself from fine strands, each one transparent alone, powerful only through patience and repetition. The pool below turns milk white at the center, then clears outward into green. Foam gathers briefly near the edge, makes delicate islands, and dissolves. You can smell the spray, clean and cold, and hear droplets striking leaves behind us. The surrounding rock is never dry. Ferns grow where ledges catch enough moisture. Moss covers surfaces that would otherwise seem bare, and every green patch softens the stone's outline. Softening is one of the valley's quiet themes. Water softens sound through distance. Moss softens rock with texture. Light softens depth by tinting it blue and green. Time softens change by spreading it across years. Even the hard chemistry of calcium carbonate becomes soft in feeling when you watch it happen through droplets, plants, and still pools. Plitvice turns mineral facts into a place where the mind can rest. We move again when the sound begins to feel familiar. The path leads us alongside quieter water, and the fall recedes behind leaves. This transition is important. After every brightness, Plitvice offers calm. After every fall, a lake. After every churn of bubbles, a surface where reflections return. The steps are not merely downward changes in elevation. They are alternating states of attention, like wakefulness and dream. You may notice that the receiving lake is not perfectly still immediately. Small ripples travel from the fall, reflecting against banks and meeting incoming currents. Over distance they flatten. Suspended bubbles rise and vanish. The white turbulence becomes transparent again. This settling is physical, but it feels emotional too. The water shows the body how disturbance can widen, fade, and become clarity without needing to be forced. The mineral particles behave with similar patience. Some remain dissolved and move onward. Some attach to biofilms or moss. Some settle in quieter pockets. Some are swept back into motion during higher flows. The system sorts them continuously, not with intention, but through differences in speed, chemistry, surface, and depth. Every pool is a gentle sorting place, and every rim is a place where movement begins again. And as we follow the lake's edge, the Plitvice Lakes steps spread into a calmer reach, where the water seems to hold more sky than sound. The forest opens slightly above us. Light falls through in broad pieces. The lake bed shelves gradually, then drops into deeper green. You can see small stones near shore, then only color, then a reflective surface that refuses to tell you exactly how deep it is. Depth here is modest compared with oceans, yet it feels inward and serene. The clarity allows you to look down until looking becomes a kind of floating. You are not diving. You are only standing beside spring water and letting your attention sink. Branches under the surface become darker with depth. Leaves resting below seem suspended in time. The lake holds them in a blue-green silence that feels almost protective. The steps create that depth by raising water levels behind tufa barriers. Without the barriers, the stream would run more directly down the valley. With them, water backs into basins, forming lakes where light, sediment, plants, and animals interact differently. The barrier does not merely interrupt the stream. It creates a habitat, a mirror, a cooling body, and a place for silence to gather. This is why the shape of Plitvice matters beyond scenery. A tufa rim changes water depth, flow speed, temperature patterns, oxygen levels, and the kinds of life that can settle nearby. A lake behind a rim becomes a small world. Then its overflow becomes the beginning of another world below. The steps are therefore both geological and ecological, building rooms for life as they descend. You and I pass one of those rooms slowly. The lake is edged with reeds, mossy stones, and submerged roots. A fish moves in the shadow, then pauses where the current brings food. The surface shows a broken image of branches above. Farther out, A brighter patch of sky trembles. The room has no walls except water, rock, light, and shade, but it feels complete. In a place like this, sound becomes spacious. You can hear the nearest trickle, the more distant fall, the faint movement of leaves, and perhaps your own breathing. The water does not drown out the forest, it gathers the forest into its rhythm. Even silence here has layers, because beneath every pause there is another current, another seep, another soft collision of water and stone. The chemical balance that permits tufa formation can be altered by many factors. Water temperature affects reaction rates. Flow speed affects gas exchange. Biological activity affects surfaces and carbon dioxide. Sediment can cover growing areas. Changes in groundwater chemistry can matter too. Yet in the intact Plitvice system, these factors have aligned in a rare way, allowing spring water to build terraces with remarkable grace. You do not have to hold the rarity as excitement. Let it feel like gratitude instead. This valley happened because conditions were right for water to become architecture. Clear springs, carbonate rock, forested slopes, living mosses, and time all met here. They did not meet with spectacle. They met in quiet increments. That is why the place feels so old and so new at once. As we descend farther, the water crosses another shallow lip, and the lake behind us drains in a shining sheet. The sheet is thin enough to show the texture of the tufa beneath. It thickens in channels where the rim dips lower. Along the edges, droplets break free and hang briefly before joining the fall. For a moment, each droplet holds a small piece of the forest upside down. Then the droplets vanish into the pool below. Nothing is lost, only changed in form. The clear sheet becomes broken water. Broken water becomes bubbles and sound. Bubbles rise and fade. The pool clears. The current continues. The mineral load shifts slightly. The next barrier waits downstream, not as an obstacle, but as another chance for the spring water to leave part of itself behind. This slow leaving behind is the heart of the Plitvice Lake steps. Spring water takes limestone into solution in the hidden parts of the landscape, carries it gently into the valley, and releases it where air, life, and movement make release possible. The stone is not carried as a visible burden. It is invisible until the moment conditions invite it to return. Then it appears as pale tufa, soft-edged and porous. You may feel the quiet wonder of that. An unseen lode becomes a visible terrace. A transparent flow becomes a lake's boundary. Something dissolved becomes something you could touch. The world is full of these changes, but Plitvice lets us see one of them clearly. It turns chemistry into steps under the forest and then lets water pour over those steps in a voice made for sleep. We keep going, and the day seems to slow around the chain of pools. Shadows lengthen along the banks. The colors deepen, not dramatically, but with a gradual cooling of the light. The waterfalls remain bright wherever they move, because motion catches even the dimmest sky. The lakes between them become darker and more reflective, holding trees, cliffs, and clouds, as if they were memories laid on water. At the edge of one darker pool, the tufa rim is thick with moss. Water seeps through it in small gleaming points. Each point becomes a thread, and each thread joins others below. You can hear them more than see them at first, a delicate ticking and whispering under the broader hush. These small seeps remind us that the barrier is a living, leaking, building threshold rather than a sealed line. The seepage may deposit minerals inside the barrier where water moves slowly through pores. It may also keep moss damp during changes in surface flow. The internal pathways are part of the step's structure. They allow exchange between upper and lower water, even where the main spill passes elsewhere. The lake is held, but never isolated. It is contained in a way that still allows connection. That kind of containment feels gentle. The water has shape without confinement. It has edges without being trapped. Perhaps that is why these lakes feel so soothing to watch. They show a boundary that serves movement rather than stopping it. The tufa gives the water a place to rest, and the water gives the tufa a reason to grow. Each depends on the other's willingness to continue. As we walk beside the next pool, you can let your gaze soften until details blur into color. Green forest above, Pale stone below, blue water between, white falls at the edges. The palette is simple, but never flat. Every breeze changes it. Every ripple rearranges it. Every depth shifts the shade. Plitvice seems to breathe color through water rather than wear it on the surface. The blue-green tones are partly a gift of clarity. Pure water absorbs some colors and scatters others, and depth changes what returns to the eye. Minerals, bottom color, vegetation, and reflected sky all add their quiet influence. Because the lakes are clear, these influences remain visible rather than hidden in clouded water. The result is color that feels illuminated from within, especially where pale tufa reflects light upward. You may notice that the brightest water is often near the edges of depth. Where a shallow shelf drops away, the color can shift suddenly from pale green to deep blue. The change feels like a step inside the lake itself. The surface stays smooth, but the eye senses the floor falling. It is another descent, smaller and quieter than the waterfalls, yet just as much part of the landscape's shape. And as we move with that inner descent, the sounds of the valley remain steady enough to become almost timeless. Water over rim, water into pool, water through moss, water under boards. The repetition is not sharp because each instance has its own texture. Together they make a soft pattern. The mind can follow until it no longer needs to follow anything at all. The Plitvice Lake steps were not carved in a single direction only. Some parts were built outward by deposition. Some were cut back by flow. Some basins deepened through erosion or sediment sorting. Some barriers shifted water into new channels. The system's present form is the result of many small negotiations held across time by the constant arrival of spring water from the karst above. Karst landscapes often have a hidden complexity that feels almost dreamlike. A stream may vanish into rock and return elsewhere. A sinkhole may collect rain. A cave may guide water beneath the surface. Springs may appear where underground pathways meet the open air. At Plitvice, this hidden world expresses itself in lakes and steps, as if the underground had found a way to become visible without losing its mystery. You can feel that mystery in the coolness of the springs. Even when sunlight warms the path, the water carries an underground freshness. It touches the air and changes it. Near the falls, your skin feels the difference. The scent is cleaner, mineral, lightly green. The sound is nearer. Everything seems to have been rinsed by a source deeper than the day around us. We come to another broad lake, and the descent pauses again. Across the water, a pale tufa barrier lies partly hidden by vegetation. The overflow is spread into many low curtains, so the far edge glimmers rather than roars. Reflections stretch toward it, broken by faint ripples. A single leaf crosses the open surface very slowly, and for a while it seems to be the only moving thing. But beneath the leaf, the entire lake is moving. Water entering from upstream must leave downstream. The movement may be slow, distributed through depth and width, but it is real. That hidden flow carries dissolved minerals, oxygen, organic matter, and tiny living particles. The lake is a passage disguised as a resting place. This is one of Plitvice's central comforts, the discovery that rest can include motion. You may let your own rest include motion too. Breath continues. Thoughts drift, settle, and pass over inner thresholds. Like the lake, you do not need to become motionless to become calm. You only need a gentler pattern, a slower current, a place where what arrives can be held briefly before it moves on. The water reaches the far barrier and spills. From this distance, the fall is a thin white seam, though we do not need to call it sharp. It is soft in the haze of spray. The forest behind it is dark, making the falling water appear luminous. You can imagine the tufa at its lip, pale and wet, receiving another invisible layer from the spring-fed flow. Layer is a simple word, but it holds much of the story. Tufa grows by layers, sometimes thin, sometimes irregular, often shaped by biological textures. Lakes fill with sediment in layers. Forest floors gather leaves in layers. Limestone itself was once made from layered marine material. Plitvice is layered in every direction, from bedrock to moss film, from underground water to the surface shimmer of the falls. The layeredness encourages a slower way of seeing. You do not need to choose between science and sensation. The cool spray on your face is also aeration. The pale rim underwater is also calcium carbonate. The mossy ledge is also a biological surface for mineral deposition. The blue-green pool is also a basin held by a natural dam. Knowledge does not break the spell here. It deepens the quiet. As we leave the broad lake, the path draws close to the outflow, and the surface begins to narrow. The current becomes visible again, pulling small reflections into stretched ribbons. Water plants lean downstream. Pebbles brighten under the moving skin. The sound ahead grows from murmur to hush, and the next step announces itself not with drama, but with a gradual gathering of brightness. The fall begins over a rounded lip, where tufa has built a soft, uneven crest. Water thickens along the lowest points and thins across higher patches. Moss gives the rim a green border. In places, the flow is clear enough to see the mineral surface beneath it. In others, it breaks white and hides the stone. The barrier is both revealed and concealed by the water that made it. This is another quiet lesson of Plitvice. Causes are often hidden by their own effects. The water builds the rim, then covers it. The moss helps form tufa, then becomes embedded in it. The underground journey shapes the spring, but the spring emerges as if it were simply there. You can stand beside the finished beauty and still be surrounded by the invisible work that continues underneath. And as the falling sheet breaks into spray, we move with it, in feeling. Lower by another step, softer by another measure. The pool below receives light in broken pieces. Bubbles rise like pale seeds and disappear. The air cools again. Somewhere behind us, the previous lake is already quiet, while ahead, another threshold waits under trees. The descent continues without needing to be counted. Counting would make it too firm. The valley is better understood as a rhythm of enoughness. Enough mineral in the water, enough air at the falls, enough moss on the ledges, enough forest to steady the slopes, enough time for small deposits to become barriers, enough flow to keep the lakes alive. Each condition meets the others in balance, and the steps emerge from that meeting. You may feel the balance in the way the path alternates between openness and enclosure. One moment we look across water. The next we pass near rock. Then the trees gather overhead, and the lake becomes a green corridor. Then a clearing returns the sky. The Plitvice Lake steps are not only vertical, they move the senses through closeness and spaciousness, brightness and shade, sound and near silence. The near silence is never empty. It contains the faintest water sounds, the soft rub of leaves, the distant breath of a cascade behind us, and the barely noticeable touch of air moving over damp ground. Your ears adjust to it the way eyes adjust to evening. After a while, the smallest trickle becomes clear. The valley teaches attention by lowering its volume. In low volume, small science becomes beautiful. A molecule of carbon dioxide, leaving the water, changes the balance that holds calcium in solution. A surface coated with microbial film catches the first mineral crystals. A strand of moss slows the flow just enough. A thin deposit roughens the surface, encouraging more deposition. Step by step, Plitvice is made by thresholds too small to see in the moment, yet large enough to hold lakes over time. We follow those thresholds downstream, where the water threads through a more open patch of vegetation. The air feels warmer here, though the stream remains cool. Sunlight makes tiny flashes on the ripples. The smell of wet leaves becomes lighter, mixed with grass and sun-warmed wood. For a few breaths, the landscape feels less enclosed, but the same mineral patience continues under the brighter surface. Open light can increase photosynthesis in aquatic plants and algae, which may influence carbon dioxide levels near their surfaces. In some settings, that activity can encourage carbonate precipitation by changing local chemistry. The details vary from place to place, but the principle is gentle enough to hold. Life changes the water close around it. The water changes what can grow there. At Plitvice, those exchanges help shape stone. You do not need to imagine the organisms as busy. They are simply living. Algae receive light. Moss receives spray. Bacteria form films. Plants bend in the current. Fish hover where oxygen and shelter meet. Their ordinary existence becomes part of the valley's architecture because the chemistry allows it. The steps are built not by effort, but by life continuing in the presence of mineral-rich water. That may be the most peaceful part of the story. The landscape is not striving, it is becoming. Springs rise, lakes hold, falls breathe, moss grows, minerals settle. None of it needs to hurry toward completion. There is no final form that the valley must reach tonight. It is enough that the water keeps moving, and the stone keeps accepting what the water leaves. As we pass the sunlit stretch, shade returns in soft bands. The water darkens under overhanging branches, then brightens where it crosses a pale shallow. The lake bed appears and disappears with the angle of light. You can hear a low fall beyond the trees, muffled by distance. The path turns toward it slowly, and the sound comes forward like a memory you knew would return. At the next rim, the tufa is terraced in small shelves, each one catching a film of water before releasing it to the shelf below. These tiny steps mirror the larger lake system. Water pauses for a fraction of a second, spreads, aerates, deposits, and moves on. The whole landscape repeats itself at different scales, and the repetition feels soothing because your mind recognizes the pattern without needing to solve it. The shelves are wet and pale, with green moss thickening along their softer edges. In the clear flow you can see bubbles sliding over them, stretching and breaking. The water's surface wrinkles into delicate lines. Each line bends around mineral bumps and living stems. The fall is not a single event but a series of small permissions, each one allowing water to lower itself gently. And as we lower with it, the valley grows more intimate again, drawing us near a pool held in shadow. The water here is darker, but still clear at the edge. A submerged branch reaches outward like a quiet hand. Fine sediment rests in protected pockets. Near the fall, the bottom is cleaner, kept open by turbulence. Every part of the pool tells you something about flow. Flow leaves signatures. Fast water clears and scours. Slow water settles and gathers. Aerated water builds tufa where chemistry and surfaces allow. Seeping water darkens stone and feeds moss. Standing beside the pool, you are reading those signatures without effort, the way you might read the mood of evening from temperature, scent, and light. Plitvice makes process visible in a language of texture. The texture of wet tufa is different from dry rock. It looks softened, almost velvety in places where moss covers it, and porous where mineral growth is exposed. Water makes it shine. Shadows fill its openings. Pale ridges catch the smallest light. If you could place your hand near it, you might imagine coolness first, then roughness, then the delicate unevenness of something built by countless small deposits. We do not need to touch it. Looking is enough. Listening is enough. The landscape is better left to its own slow work. The spring water has been shaping the Plitvice Lake steps without our hands, and it will continue shaping them after our attention drifts. This thought is restful because it releases us from needing to participate. We can simply be near the process and let it carry the mind. The path rises slightly around a bank, though the water continues downward, and for a moment we look back over the pool we just passed. From this angle, the fall is partly hidden by leaves. The lake above it shines through gaps in the trees. Layers of water and forest overlap, making it hard to tell where one step ends and the next begins. That uncertainty feels natural here. The steps are connected so closely that boundaries blur. A lake becomes an outflow becomes a fall becomes a pool becomes another lake. Human categories help us describe them, but the water experiences them as one continuous descent. You can let your own categories soften too, letting thought become sensation, and sensation become the simple awareness of moving quietly beside clear water. As we go on, the spring-fed clarity remains our guide. It reveals stones, roots, fish, and tufa. It reveals depth by changing color. It reveals movement through ripples, bubbles, and bending plants. It reveals the health of the system, because tufa growth needs water that is clean enough for light and life to reach the surfaces where minerals settle. Clarity here is not emptiness. It is relationship made visible. The relationship begins before the springs emerge. Rainfall enters soil, absorbs carbon dioxide, and moves into carbonate rock. There it dissolves minerals, widening pathways little by little. It returns to the surface carrying the ingredients for new stone. The journey is circular in feeling, though always downward in this valley. Stone becomes water's cargo, water becomes stone's maker. The old seabed becomes a forest staircase of lakes. You can rest in that circle as the next fall comes into view. It is smaller than the last, and very fine, pouring over a mossy rim in strands no thicker than ribbons. The pool beneath it is shallow and bright. Sunlight reaches the bottom, where pale tufa fragments and leaves lie together. The sound is delicate, almost like rain falling into a bowl. Small falls like this may be easy to pass by, but they carry the essence of Plitvice. Clear water over living stone, air entering the flow, minerals ready to settle, moss holding the edge, a pool forming below. Nothing grand is required. The same principles that shape larger terraces are present in miniature, and sometimes the smaller forms feel more intimate because you can take them in with one slow breath. We pause beside it long enough for your ears to adjust. The fine strands make separate sounds, each one slightly different. Some strike leaves, some strike stone, some fall directly into water. Together they create a soft, layered whisper. The air smells green and cool. A tiny patch of foam turns near the edge, then dissolves so completely that it seems never to have been there. Dissolving and appearing are both part of the valley's language. Limestone dissolves underground. Calcium carbonate appears as tufa. Foam appears under a fall and dissolves in the pool. Reflections appear on still water and break when the wind touches them. The Plitvice Lakes steps are not built from permanence alone. They are built from transformations that keep passing through one another with quiet ease, and as we continue past the small fall, the water slips away through another channel, carrying us onward in thought. The path follows, but not too closely. Sometimes the lake is beside us, sometimes it falls below us. Sometimes we hear it before we see it again. This gentle losing and finding keeps the descent from becoming a line. It becomes a wandering through connected calm. The surrounding forest filters every sensation. It softens sunlight into green shade. It holds moisture close to the ground. It steadies slopes that might otherwise send sediment into the lakes. It adds leaves, branches, and roots to the water's world. It gives birds, insects, and small mammals places to live. Plitvice is famous for its water, but the water's clarity and tufa growth are held within a forested embrace. That embrace feels present even when you look only at the lake. Reflecting branches tremble on the surface. Shadows from trunks cross the shallows. Leaves float where they have fallen. Roots darken the banks. The forest is above, beside, and inside the water, and the water returns the favor by cooling the air, feeding moss, and carrying humidity into every hollow. We move toward another lowering of the valley, and the sound ahead becomes wide again. The cascade is spread across many tufa shelves, so the water seems to descend as a luminous curtain broken into soft folds. Behind it, the rock is dark. In front of it, spray drifts outward. You can feel the coolness before the path reaches the viewpoint, and your breathing slows to meet it. Here, the Plitvice Lake steps show their generosity. One lake does not merely end. It gives itself over a bright edge into many small streams of falling water, and each stream makes room for air and light. The pool below does not merely receive. It softens, clears, and carries the water onward. The whole scene is an exchange of receiving and releasing, repeated until it feels like sleep itself. The mineral formation continues in such places wherever the conditions remain favorable. Tufa may grow fastest in zones of splashing, thin flow, and biological activity, though rates vary. The important feeling is that growth is local and responsive. It follows water's contact with surfaces. It follows chemistry. It follows the living textures that make deposition easier. The steps are therefore shaped by the exact way water touches the world. You can watch a single strand of the cascade and understand this. It falls from a mossy lip, strikes a lower shelf, spreads into a fan, and gathers again into a narrow runnel. At each contact, the water changes. It loses gas, it gains air, it leaves a trace, it continues. Nothing in the strand is wasted, because every touch becomes part of the valley's ongoing form. As we stand there, the mist reaches us in waves. The droplets are fine enough to feel like cool breath. rather than rain. They settle on hair, skin, and fabric. They darken the wooden path. They pearl on leaves near the fall. The air tastes faintly mineral if you notice it, and the sound fills the chest without pressing against it. This fullness is still calm. It is not an interruption of the sleepward mood. It is like a deeper exhale in the middle of breathing. The valley can be full of sound and remain peaceful because the sound is continuous, rounded, and expected. There is no suddenness in it. The falls have been speaking before we arrived, and they continue in the same tone as we pass. And as we move beyond the wide curtain, the water settles again into another green basin, carrying foam, light, and dissolved stone toward the next quiet rim. The surface opens, the sound recedes, and the forest reflections return. You can feel how the system restores calm after movement. It never leaves the listener at the fall. It always offers the lake after, the place where everything widens and slows. In this basin, the shoreline curves gently, creating pockets where the current is barely visible. Fine sediment gathers there, along with small fragments of leaves. In clearer central water, fish pass through shafts of light. Near the outlet, the surface tightens and begins to move more decisively. The lake contains several moods at once, and each mood belongs to a different speed of water. Speed is one of the quiet sculptors here. Fast flow aerates and shapes edges. Slow flow permits settling and reflection. Seeping flow feeds moss and internal deposition. Underground flow dissolves limestone in darkness. Falling flow renews oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. The Plitvice Lakes steps are made from water moving at different speeds through different parts of the same landscape, each speed leaving its own signature. You may feel your listening becoming layered in the same way. Part of you hears the nearest ripple, part of you hears the far cascade, part of you senses the hidden underground water that cannot be heard at all. Another part simply rests in the coolness and color. The valley encourages this broad, unforced attention, where no single detail needs to be held tightly. The next threshold is lower and more subdued, almost hidden by vegetation. Water passes through gaps in the moss and over a pale rim partly covered with leaves. It does not gleam as brightly as the larger falls, but its work is the same. The spring water crosses air, living surfaces, and mineral edges. It leaves what it can. It carries the rest. Some of the leaves caught here will decay and release nutrients. Some may be swept away during higher flow. Some may become coated in carbonate if they remain within active depositional zones. Their presence can alter small currents, creating microhabitats for insects or microorganisms. Even temporary obstructions matter briefly, and in a system shaped by repetition, brief influences can leave traces if conditions return often enough. This is another way to understand the steps. They are not only the result of steady conditions, but also of countless temporary events absorbed into a longer pattern. A storm, a fallen branch, a season of strong moss growth, a shift in flow, a colder spring, a warmer summer. Each event passes, but the valley responds. The response may be subtle, yet subtlety is enough when time is generous. We continue along the lakeside, and the path grows quieter. The water here reflects more shadow than sky. The air feels damp and still. You can hear a faint drip from the canyon wall, separate from the main flow, touching stone at a slow interval. That drip may carry its own dissolved minerals, its own small chemistry, its own possibility of leaving a pale mark where it falls. Such seepage can form delicate carbonate deposits on rock faces, though the main Plitvice terraces are shaped by the spring-fed lake and stream system. The idea is similar enough to feel connected. Water moves through limestone, emerges, loses carbon dioxide, and leaves calcium carbonate behind. Whether in a broad cascade or a small wall seep, the gesture is the same, water returning stone to visibility. You may look at the wall and see narrow trails of moisture shining in the low light. Tiny plants take hold where water persists. Mineral stains brighten the surface. The rock face is not separate from the lakes below. It is another surface in the same conversation, another place where the Karst reveals how porous and responsive stone can be when water is given time. And as the valley lowers again, the next lake appears through trees, darker, smoother, and more enclosed. The surface looks almost like polished glass until a small current draws lines across it. The forest reflection is deep enough to make the trees seem doubled. At the far end, a pale edge shows where the lake will leave itself. We walk toward that edge slowly, letting the quiet gather around us. The edge draws us in by sound before shape. At first it is only a slight brightening in the dark water, a place where the smooth surface begins to loosen. Then you notice small leaves moving faster, the reflection stretching, the water gathering itself into a narrow breath. The Plitvice Lakes steps often announce themselves this way, not with height, but with a soft change in attention. We come closer, and the pale tufa rim appears beneath the flow. It is rounded in places, ragged in others, clothed with moss where spray stays constant. The water presses over it, in a thin sheet, clear enough to reveal the stone's uneven skin. Along the lip, tiny bubbles cling for a moment, then break free. Each bubble is part of the same exchange, helping the spring water release what it carried from the limestone hills. You can imagine the journey of that water again, because it is always present here. Rain falls through leaves, sinks into soil, and enters cracks in carbonate rock. It moves through darkness, gathering dissolved minerals in its quiet passage. Then it returns through springs, chilled and clear, ready to meet daylight. At Plitvice, that meeting becomes visible because the water leaves pale stone behind wherever flow, air, life and time come together. The fall below us is low and wide, so the descent feels like fabric being laid over a ledge. It folds around moss cushions, splits around small protrusions, and rejoins in the pool below. You can hear the separate threads if you listen long enough. Some make a whisper, some make a soft tapping, and some vanish into the general hush, becoming part of the valley's breathing. There is no need to name the pool. It is enough to know it belongs to the long chain. The lake above has held the water for a while, letting sediments settle and reflections deepen. The fall refreshes it with air. The pool below gathers it again, and the next barrier waits farther down. This repeating pattern gives the Plitvice Lake steps their sleep-like rhythm. Holding and release, holding and release. At the margin of the pool, reeds and low plants slow the water almost completely. Fine particles collect in the stillness between stems. Small insects move in the shelter, and tiny rings spread from their touch. A fish turns once in the green shade, then becomes part of the shadow again. You may feel your own thoughts doing the same, turning gently, then resting out of sight. The mineral work continues, even where life seems quiet. Biofilms can coat submerged and wetted surfaces, forming thin living layers that influence where crystals begin to gather. Mosses and algae change local conditions near their surfaces, affecting carbon dioxide and mineral precipitation. Water chemistry, flow speed, sunlight, and temperature all take part. The result is not a simple coating placed on the landscape, but a slow collaboration between water and life. You see this collaboration most clearly at the edges, where moss stays wet but not drowned under deep still water. The green growth lifts slightly from the tufa, making a textured surface for flow to cross. Water divides, aerates, and leaves behind calcium carbonate in tiny amounts. Over time, the green edge becomes pale beneath itself, and the living surface helps build the very ledge on which it grows. As we follow the pool's outflow, the valley narrows. The sound of the next cascade arrives through leaves before the water comes into view. The air cools again, and the scent of limestone becomes stronger, almost like rain on clean stone. Your skin feels the dampness first at your hands, then at your face. Every descent seems to draw the atmosphere closer around us. The canyon wall beside the path is streaked with moisture. Ferns cling in small shelves, their fronds bending toward the light. Drops gather at their tips and fall at slow intervals. Those drops are not the main architects of the lake steps, yet they belong to the same mood of karst water, appearing from hidden pathways, touching open air, and leaving faint mineral traces where patience allows. You may notice that nothing here feels separate for long. A drip becomes a stain becomes a mossy patch changes flow. Flow changes mineral growth changes the shape of the water's path. Plitvice is made from these linked gestures, and the more softly we look, the more the whole valley seems to move as one continuous process. The next cascade appears in pieces. First a white strand, then a green ledge, then a deeper pool below. The water drops through several small shelves instead of one clean fall, and each shelf catches it for a moment before letting it continue. This is how the steps speak at a smaller scale, repeating the larger descent in miniature, with each ledge becoming a quiet pause inside the falling. On the upper shelf, you can see a thin mineral crust forming around moss and shallow flow. It looks pale and slightly rough, like stone that has grown from foam. The water passes over it continuously, but the surface is not smooth. It is full of tiny ridges, openings and pockets. These irregularities help slow and divide the flow, creating more places where carbon dioxide can escape and minerals can settle. This makes the tufa both result and cause. It forms because water moves over surfaces in certain ways, and once formed, it changes the way water moves next. A small ridge creates turbulence. Turbulence encourages gas exchange. Gas exchange encourages deposition. Deposition enlarges the ridge. The valley grows through feedback so gentle that it feels less like construction than listening. You and I remain near the cascade until its details become familiar. The white water no longer feels bright, it becomes soft. The green moss no longer asks to be studied, it becomes a cushion in the mind. The pool below no longer looks like a destination, it becomes the next breath of the same water, widening after descent, clearing after movement, resting before the following rim. And as we continue, the Plitvice Lake steps lead us into another shaded basin, where the surface is dark enough to hold the forest almost perfectly. The reflections are deep, but the edge remains clear. You can see pale stones near your feet, leaves resting on the bottom, and small currents moving like transparent threads through the shallows. The water feels still, yet the whole basin is gently passing onward. This passing is easier to sense near the outlet, where the mirrored trees begin to bend, ripples converge. A faint line forms across the surface. The lake gathers itself toward another tufa lip, drawn by gravity, but moderated by the shape it has already made. Spring water shaped the rim, and now the rim shapes the spring water, turning descent into a sequence of quiet rooms. The room we are standing beside has walls of forest and limestone. Its ceiling is sky, its floor is mineral, leaf and depth. It holds cool air close to the surface, so the temperature near the water feels different from the path just above. If you breathe in slowly, you may catch the scent of wet bark, clear water, and stone touched by spray. Such sensory details are part of the system, not ornaments placed around it. Cool air hints at spring-fed water and shaded basins. Wet bark tells of constant humidity near the falls. Mineral scent rises from exposed limestone and tufa. The hush reflects many small flows, rather than one single torrent. Even the way your skin feels here gives information about how Plitvice holds moisture in the valley. A small current draws a floating leaf toward the rim. It approaches slowly, turns sideways, and pauses against a tuft of moss. For several breaths, it trembles there, caught between rest and release. Then a little more water lifts it free, and it slips over the edge. The leaf does not resist the descent. It follows the same path as the spring, briefly visible, then folded into the fall. Below the rim, the leaf spins once in white water, then disappears into the pool's green clearing. It may sink later, or catch on another branch, or break down into the lake's quiet nutrient cycle. Plitvice receives such small offerings constantly. Leaves, twigs, pollen, and soil particles arrive from the forest, and the water sorts them by weight, shape, and flow, letting some settle and carrying others onward. This sorting helps maintain the lake's clarity where conditions remain balanced. Heavy particles drop in calmer water. Organic matter collects in margins and pockets. Clearer flow continues to the next cascade, where aeration refreshes it again. The sequence of lakes and steps acts like a slow natural filter, though the word filter feels too mechanical for something so graceful and alive. You might think of it instead as a long settling of breath. Each basin slows the water enough for some things to fall away. Each fall stirs it enough to keep it fresh. The system does not purify by forcing. It clarifies by giving water time, space, and changing movement. That is why the pools can appear so transparent, with branches and pale stones visible under layers of shifting green light. As we move beyond the basin, the path comes near a place where several small streams reunite. They slip from different ledges, cross over pale tufa, and gather into a single channel. The sounds overlap softly, like voices heard through a wall. You can see that each stream has taken its own route over the barrier, guided by slight differences in height, moss growth, and mineral texture. Those routes may change with seasons. Higher water can cover a broad shelf and distribute flow differently. Lower water may concentrate movement into narrow runnels. Moss may thicken in one place and redirect a thread. A mineral lip may grow enough to shift the water sideways. The Plitvice Lake steps are therefore not still objects, but responsive forms, always adjusting to the amount and path of flow. This responsiveness makes the valley feel gently alive. It is not alive in the way a creature is alive, with a single body and will. It is alive as an ecosystem and landform are alive, through exchange, adaptation, growth, and renewal. Water moves, stone forms, moss spreads, channels alter, pools deepen or fill. Nothing needs to decide. The pattern continues because each part answers the others. We follow one of the reunited channels down a slight slope, where the water runs shallow and quick. Pebbles flicker beneath it. Sunlight appears in broken flashes. The sound is lighter here, more like a stream than a fall. For a while the valley opens enough that you can sense the sky above the trees, pale and calm, resting on the moving surface in small bright pieces. This shallow running water may still deposit minerals along its bed and edges, especially where turbulence and biological surfaces encourage precipitation. Yet it may also carry material onward, depending on speed and chemistry. The same spring water can build in one place and pass through another without leaving much visible trace. It is selective, not by intention, but by condition. Plitvice forms where circumstances invite the water to remain as stone. The idea of invitation feels right here. A mossy ledge invites mineral crystals. A calm pool invites sediment. A shaded bank invites ferns. A limestone crack invites underground flow. The valley is full of invitations, and the water accepts them one by one. It never needs to force itself into beauty. It simply responds to openings, surfaces, gradients, and time. As the channel widens, it enters another pool with a quiet inward turn. The water slows so visibly that the surface seems to relax. Ripples stretch, separate, and fade. The pool reflects a leaning tree, its trunk broken into wavering bands. Near the bank, roots disappear into the water, dark and smooth. You can smell damp soil under the mineral freshness, a deeper earth scent held in shade. Roots near banks help stabilize the ground, reducing the amount of loose sediment entering the lakes. That steadiness supports clear water, and clear water supports the living surfaces involved in tufa formation. The forest's role is therefore both visual and structural. It frames the lakes, shelters them, cools them, feeds them, and protects the conditions under which the spring water can build the steps. The connection is quiet but profound. Without the forested slopes, the lakes would feel exposed, and their chemistry and clarity could change. Without the limestone, the water would lack its mineral richness. Without the springs, the terraces would lose their steady supply. Without moss and microbial surfaces, deposition would be less textured and responsive. Plitvice exists because these factors meet in balance. You can let the word balance become a physical sensation. The body settles into the sound of water. The shoulders lower, the jaw loosens, the breath lengthens. Around us, the valley demonstrates balance in matter and movement, not as an idea to think about sharply, but as a condition to rest inside. The lake holds, the fall releases, the next lake holds again. We come near the outlet, and the water begins to quicken. The leaning tree's reflection stretches until it becomes unrecognizable, then breaks into lines. A cluster of leaves rotates at the edge of the current. The tufa lip ahead is lower on one side, and most of the flow chooses that path. The rest seeps across moss, creating a second, softer descent a little farther along. This division of flow can encourage uneven growth. Where water moves consistently over one part of a rim, deposition may thicken that section under favorable conditions. Where flow is reduced, moss may dry or change. and mineral growth may slow. Then a future high water event may spread across the whole rim again. The barrier's shape is the memory of many such changes, held in porous limestone. You can see why the Plitvice Lake steps cannot be understood as fixed stairs. They are more like slow water-made thresholds, each one adjusting under the touch of flow. Their outlines are irregular because water is responsive. Their surfaces are textured because life participates. Their colors are varied because depth, light, and mineral surfaces differ from place to place. Their beauty is the beauty of process made visible. The fall over the lower side is narrow and clear. It slips through a groove in the tufa, brightening as it accelerates. At the bottom, it strikes a stone and becomes white for a moment before clearing again. The smaller descent through moss is softer, almost hidden, a set of droplets forming under green edges. Together they make one step, divided into two moods. We move with the quieter mood now, following the mossy seep along the rim. Droplets gather slowly, swell and fall. Each one contains the same chemistry as the larger stream, though its path is more delicate. It may deposit a little mineral where it hangs, or where it touches the moss, or where it lands below. The scale is small, but the patience is the same. At this close scale, time seems to stretch. A droplet takes shape, a ripple widens, a bubble clings to a stem. Light shifts on wet stone. You begin to feel how the entire landscape could be built from moments like this, repeated beyond counting, each one too small to notice alone, yet together strong enough to lift lakes and guide rivers downward. And as we leave the rim, the next pool below receives us in sound first, a rounded murmur under the trees. The water there is slightly more turbulent near the fall, but quiet toward the far side. Foam traces the current in soft arcs, showing where the flow moves before becoming invisible again. You can watch those arcs slowly loosen, as if the pool is smoothing the memory of descent. The smoothing is physical. Turbulence dissipates energy. Bubbles rise. Suspended matter sorts by size and weight. The current spreads through a wider basin, but it also feels emotional, because the eye and ear receive the change as calm. Plitvice is full of these small recoveries, where falling water becomes still enough to mirror leaves within only a short distance. This rhythm may be why the place feels made for listening at night, even when we imagine it in daylight. It gives the mind repeated reassurance. Movement is followed by rest. Sound is followed by quiet. Brightness is followed by shade. Each descent resolves into a pool, and each pool eventually offers itself onward. The pattern is trustworthy, and trust is part of falling asleep. We pass along the pool's edge, where pale tufa continues beneath shallow water like a submerged terrace. Thin algae coat some surfaces, giving them a greenish warmth. Small snails move so slowly they seem almost still. In the deeper center, the water turns blue-green, and then darker, holding depth without revealing every detail. The surface is calm enough to reflect the trees, though the reflected trunks bend with faint ripples. The underwater terraces show how tufa growth can extend below and near the waterline, where wet surfaces persist. Some deposits form around submerged plants or organic material. Others develop where flow crosses shallow shelves. The distinction between land and water is soft here. A rim may be above water in one season and underwater in another. A mossy edge may become mineral, and a mineral shelf may grow moss again. This softness at the boundary gives Plitvice its particular tenderness. Water does not meet stone as a sharp line. It enters pores, covers shelves, seeps under moss, and shines in small hollows. Stone does not stand apart from water. It accepts films, droplets, roots, and living green. The two states interlace, and the steps emerge from that interlacing with patience. You may notice how often the valley refuses straight lines. The lake margins curve. The tufa rims are scalloped. The waterfalls split and reunite. The forest leans in irregularly, and the reflections tremble. Even the underground pathways that feed the springs are likely complex, following fractures and openings in the limestone. The whole system is guided by structure, but expressed through wandering. Wandering can still be orderly. The water is always descending, always responding to gravity, always shaped by chemistry. Yet within that direction, it explores every ledge, pore, and channel available to it. The Plitvice Lake steps show how a landscape can have purpose without hurry, direction without force, and complexity without noise. This is a useful feeling to carry into rest. As we continue, the pool narrows into a clear passage under branches. The water is close enough to hear in small detail again. It slides over stones, touches roots, and gathers under a low tufa shelf before slipping out in a thin stream. A few leaves rest against the shelf, their edges darkened by wetness. One of them lifts and settles repeatedly, responding to pulses too subtle to see. Those subtle pulses may come from upstream variations in flow, tiny waves reflecting from edges, or the intermittent release of bubbles and foam near the fall. In flowing water, nothing is perfectly uniform. Even a calm stream is full of small changes. Over time, those changes influence deposition and erosion, because mineral growth depends on contact, turbulence, chemistry, and surface conditions at particular points. You can let that precision become softness rather than analysis. The exact point where water touches moss matters. The exact speed over a rim matters. The exact shade on a ledge matters. The world is intimate with itself here, attentive to details beyond ordinary notice. Plitvice reminds you that small conditions are not small in their consequences when they are repeated through years of spring-fed flow. The passage opens, and we reach a place where the valley floor drops more clearly. Below, several pools are visible at once, stepping down through the trees. Their surfaces catch different colors depending on angle and shade. One is bright green, another is blue. A lower one is almost black under the canyon wall. Between them, white threads of water connect each basin to the next, like quiet handwriting. From this view, the Plitvice Lake steps become easier to feel as a whole system. They are not separate scenic moments. They are linked reservoirs formed by growing tufa barriers along a karst river. Each barrier raises the water level behind it. Each overflow creates cascades that aerate, deposit, and shape new edges. Each lake modifies the water before it reaches the next step below. The view is broad, but the mood remains close. You can still hear droplets near your feet and feel mist from the closest fall. A fern brushes the side of the path. The air is cool under the trees. The distant pools seem almost dreamlike through the branches, yet the immediate textures keep us grounded. Wet wood, limestone, moss, and the steady pressure of water moving down the valley. We begin to descend along the path, following the visual chain. The upper pool disappears behind leaves. The next pool grows larger. The sound of its fall becomes clearer. Your sense of direction is held by water more than by trail, because every cascade points downward. Plitvice guides without insisting. You always know where the valley is going, but each step invites you to linger. Lingering is important in a landscape made slowly. If you pass too quickly, you may see only beauty. If you linger, you begin to sense cause, relationship, and time. The pale rims are no longer just edges. They become active deposits. The moss is no longer just softness. It becomes a participant. The spring water is no longer just clear. It becomes the carrier of limestone returning to form. This returning is a kind of circular descent. The water moves downward, yet the mineral it carries rises into barriers that hold lakes higher than the channel would otherwise be. Gravity pulls the stream down, while deposition builds upward against it. The stepped valley exists in that meeting. One force lowers, another process lifts. Between them, the lakes are held in a graceful suspension. You may feel that suspension in the way each pool seems balanced at the brink. Water fills it to the level of its rim, then spills. The lake is always complete and always leaving. It holds exactly until it cannot hold more, then gives the excess away. This is not straying. It is the natural arrangement of flow and boundary, and in Plitvice it becomes visible again and again. The next pool below is bright along one side where sunlight reaches through the canopy. In the bright edge, submerged plants glow green. In the shaded center, the water deepens to blue. Along the far rim, the overflow breaks into many small tongues of white. The contrast is soothing rather than sharp, because every color is softened by water and leaf-filtered light. Light also reveals the mineral surfaces beneath. Pale tufa reflects from the shallows, making the edges luminous. Darker organic material softens the corners. Where the bottom drops, blue-green depth gathers. The spring water's clarity allows all these layers to show at once, so the lake feels transparent and mysterious together. You can see much, but not everything, and that partial seeing is part of the calm. We pause where the path meets a wooden crossing over a narrow outflow. Beneath it, water rushes through a small gap between tufa shoulders. The current is stronger here, but still rounded by the channel. It makes a low, hollow sound under the boards. You can feel vibration in the soles of your feet if you imagine standing there, the spring's movement passing beneath you toward another fall. The gap may have formed where flow concentrated along a lower or weaker part of the barrier. Concentrated flow can erode or maintain channels, while deposition continues along wetted margins. Over time, the channel may deepen, shift, or be partly sealed by new growth. The form is never final. It is a temporary agreement between the water's force and the barrier's ongoing construction. Temporary does not mean unstable in a frightening sense. It simply means alive to change. The whole valley is temporary on a long enough scale, and yet it feels steady because change is distributed through many small events. Plitvice does not need permanence to feel peaceful. It offers continuity instead, a long weaving of water, stone, and moss that holds its pattern while altering its threads. After the crossing, the path follows the outflow into a shaded turn. The water's sound softens as it spreads again. Leaves overhead make shifting patterns on the surface. A few droplets fall from a branch and merge without trace. The pool below is partly hidden until we step closer, and then it opens suddenly into a quiet green hollow. Surrounded by damp stone and rooted banks, the hollow feels sheltered. The air is cooler and more still. The smell of wet limestone is mixed with leaf litter and moss. Small ripples move across the surface from the incoming stream, but they lose strength before reaching the far shore. At the edges, water plants make a dark lace under the surface. The place feels held, not enclosed, as if the valley has cupped one hand around it. In such a pool, sediments can accumulate in the quieter zones. Organic material may collect along margins. Aquatic insects find refuge among plants and submerged roots. Fish may rest where flow is gentle, but oxygen remains sufficient. The pool's character is created by the step above it and the step below it, by how water enters, pauses, and prepares to leave. You can see the leaving point at the far side, though it is almost hidden by moss. A thin shine runs over the tufa lip. The water gathers there slowly, then slips out of the hollow in a soft, narrow fall. This modest threshold is as much a part of the Plitvice Lakes steps as any larger cascade. It holds a small world behind it, and begins another below. The scale changes constantly, and that helps the descent feel dreamlike. A broad lake becomes a narrow channel becomes a fall becomes a pool no wider than a room. Then the valley opens again. Your attention expands and contracts with the water, never abruptly, always in response to the next shape offered by spring and stone. And as we follow that narrow fall, the sound ahead becomes more complex, suggesting several streams crossing over one another. The path passes through damp shade, where the ground smells dark and clean. Moss covers roots near the stones. The leaves above are still. The only movement is water, and even that movement feels old, accustomed, and quietly sure of where it is going. The streams appear in a braid of silver. They slide across a sloping tufa surface, divided by ridges and small islands of moss. Some channels are shallow enough to show every pale detail beneath them. Others are white with bubbles. The braided flow gathers at the lower edge and falls into a pool that gleams through branches. The whole surface is a study in division and reunion. Braided flow like this can create varied zones of deposition. Thin sheets may encourage carbonate precipitation across broad surfaces. Faster runnels may keep channels open. Mossy islands may grow outward where spray and shallow flow persist. Small differences in elevation become important because water will favor lower paths, then alter them through erosion and deposition. The tufa slope is both map and maker of the current. You may notice how the water seems to choose, though of course it follows physics without intention. It chooses the lower groove, the smoother path, the open pore, the mossy edge. Then its passage changes those places, making some easier and others less so. Over time, this creates a landscape that looks almost deliberate, as if the spring had been composing its descent in pale, wet lines. The pool beneath the braided slope is filled with moving reflections. White water enters at one side, sending bubbles across the surface. A darker current turns near the center. Along the far bank, the water is calm enough to mirror leaves. Within a few steps, the pool contains turbulence, rotation, and stillness. Plitvice rarely gives one condition alone. It layers them gently, allowing the eye to rest where it wants. We let the eye rest on the calm far bank. There, a low branch touches the surface and makes a small point of contact. Ripples spread outward whenever the branch moves in the breeze. Around its submerged tip, mineral film may begin if conditions remain right, though the branch itself may eventually decay or be carried away. Even the lightest contact can become part of the water's story for a while. This is how the forest enters the geology without becoming separate from it. A branch changes flow, a leaf alters a tiny eddy, roots stabilize a bank, mosses turn wet rock into mineral-growing surface. Microorganisms build films where crystals can attach. The Plitvice Lake steps are made through spring water, but spring water finds its shapes among living things, and that makes the geology feel gentle. You can carry that gentleness as we move onward. The valley is not empty stone. It is inhabited by small, quiet lives, many of them easy to miss. Insects skim the margins, fish hold under shade, mosses brighten in spray, bacteria and algae work invisibly on wet surfaces. Each life follows its own needs, yet together they help create the conditions that make the steps endure. At the next bend, the water falls behind a screen of leaves. We see it only in flashes, a white movement between green shapes. The sound is muffled, more intimate than before. It feels like listening from another room while rain falls outside. The path stays close to the bank, and the lake below appears slowly, first as a dark shine, then as a widening surface under the trees. The lake's surface is nearly still away from the incoming fall. Reflected leaves form a soft pattern that shifts only when a ripple reaches them. Near shore, the water is transparent enough to show a thin layer of pale sediment over darker organic material. The boundary between mineral and leaf matter is uneven. This is a place where forest and spring water settle together, making a quiet record at the edge. Sediment records can tell stories of flow, season, and change, though we do not need to read them closely tonight. It is enough to know that the lakebed receives what the water and forest bring. Fine mineral grains, organic fragments, pollen, and leaves may rest there. Some material is buried, some decomposes, some is moved again by currents. The bottom is not a final place, but a slow holding. Holding appears everywhere at Plitvice. Tufa barriers hold lakes, lakes hold reflections, moss holds water, roots hold soil, the underground rock holds and guides the springs. Even shade holds coolness in the canyon. This repeated holding makes the valley feel cradled, though every held thing is also in motion. The water teaches that holding and moving can happen together without conflict. As we continue, the sound of the hidden fall fades behind us, replaced by the smaller sounds of shoreline water. Little waves touch the bank, though the lake is calm. A beetle crosses a wet stone. The air smells of moss and mineral shade. Your mind may begin to float between details, not needing to choose one, letting them pass in a slow procession like leaves on water. The next outflow is broad but shallow, and the tufa beneath it has a honeycombed look, where water has moved through pores and around old plant structures. You can see why this stone feels lighter than ordinary limestone. It was formed around spaces. It carries the memory of bubbles, stems, and flowing films. When water crosses it, the surface seems to belong partly to stone and partly to motion. Tufa's porosity is central to the way the steps behave. It allows water to seep, not only spill. It provides surfaces for further deposition. It can shelter small organisms in wet microspaces. Over time, pores may fill with additional carbonate, strengthening older deposits, while newer outer layers remain more open. The barrier has ages within it, younger and older textures touching in the same rim. You can imagine the inner parts of a barrier in darkness, saturated, cool, and slowly changing. Water passes through tiny openings. Minerals deposit along hidden walls. Some spaces narrow, others remain open. Above, moss grows in light. Below, droplets emerge from shadow. The visible waterfall is only the outward expression of a much more intricate wet body, one that holds the lake while allowing passage through itself. And as we cross beside the shallow outflow, the water gives a different sound, more like silk pulled over stone than falling spray. It is smooth and continuous. The surface gleams in long lines. Leaves caught in it slide slowly, then quicken near the lip. You can feel the descent approaching by the way the water gathers shine before it breaks. The break is gentle. The thin sheet wrinkles, turns white at its lower edge and releases into a small drop. Below it, the pool is close enough that the fall seems to fold rather than fall. Water lands, rolls and clears. The whole movement is compact, soft and complete. Even a small step performs the full pattern of Plitvice, from stillness to movement and back again. This repeating completeness is restful, because no single step must carry the whole meaning. Each threshold tells the story again. Spring water over tufa, air entering flow, minerals returning to stone, moss receiving spray, pool receiving fall. The next outflow beginning in quiet. You can enter the story at any point and still understand where you are. The valley keeps reorienting the listener with water. We follow the pool's edge to a place where sunlight reaches through a break in the canopy. The light touches the water at an angle, making the surface flash gold and green. Under that brightness, the bottom is visible in fine detail. Pale tufa fragments lie among darker leaves. Small plants sway in the current. The lake seems both shallow and deep, because light reveals the edge, but not the center. The sunlit zone may encourage plant and algal growth, while shaded parts support different communities. These variations create a mosaic of surfaces for mineral deposition and ecological life. The Plitvice Lake steps are not uniform, even when their pattern repeats. Each pool has its own combination of light, depth, flow, substrate, and surrounding vegetation. The whole system is unified by process, but expressed through local difference. Difference keeps the descent from becoming mechanical. One fall is wide and whispering. Another is narrow and bright. One pool is open to sky. Another is hidden under limestone walls. One rim is mossy and green. Another is pale and exposed beneath clear water. The same spring-fed chemistry moves through all of them, but it never makes the same place twice. You may feel that same difference in your listening. Some sounds come forward, then recede. Some details sharpen, then blur. Your breathing might align with a low cascade for a while, then with a quieter ripple near the bank. The valley gives many soft anchors, and each one is enough. No attention has to be perfect here. Wandering attention belongs to the water's way. As the path curves, we come near a deeper section where the water darkens under a limestone overhang. The wall rises above the pool, damp and mottled, with plants growing in small cracks. The surface below is smooth, almost black in the shade, except where occasional droplets fall from the overhang and draw rings outward. The rings expand slowly, touching the reflected rock before fading. The overhang hints at the dissolving power of water in limestone landscapes. Over long periods, water can enlarge fractures, hollow surfaces, and carve recesses, especially where flow and chemistry favor dissolution. Elsewhere, that same water deposits carbonate as tufa. The contrast is quiet but remarkable. Plitvice exists because water removes stone in hidden and exposed places, then returns stone in new forms along the steps. Removal and return happen without conflict. The karst above gives minerals to the spring. The spring gives minerals to the tufa. The tufa gives shape to the lakes. The lakes give time to the water. The falls give air back into the flow. Each act changes the next. You can let this cycle move through your thoughts as slowly as the shaded ripples below the wall. The pool under the overhang feels especially still. It holds cooler air, darker light, and a softer echo of the falls. You might imagine the water here as listening more than speaking. Near the far edge, a small outlet brightens where it leaves the shade. The spring does not remain in darkness. It passes through it, gathers itself, and returns to the green light beyond. And as we follow that brightening, the next descent begins almost invisibly, a low run of water through moss and pale stone. There is no dramatic drop, only a gradual lowering over many tiny ledges. The sound is a continuous murmur. The water's surface breaks and reforms so often that it seems woven from little movements, each one briefly present, each one released. Gradual descents like this can be important zones of tufa growth because water remains shallow, aerated, and in contact with active surfaces over a longer distance. Instead of one sharp fall, there are many small exchanges with air and moss. The mineral response may be spread across the slope. The resulting surface can build outward in terraces, steps within steps, creating intricate forms that guide future flow. You can see why spring water is such a patient sculptor. It does not need a single powerful moment. It uses contact. It uses repetition. It uses the slope, the sunlight, the moss, the chemistry, and the quiet pull of gravity. Every thin film of water over stone becomes an opportunity. Every opportunity leaves only a trace, but traces gather when the valley gives them time. The slope levels into another pool, and the sound falls away behind us. The water here is so calm near the middle that the sky appears almost undisturbed. A cloud moves in the reflection, slow and pale. Around the edges, leaves and small foam pieces show the current's hidden path. You can watch them trace arcs that the clear surface alone would never reveal. Those arcs show how water enters, circulates, and exits the basin. Circulation affects temperature, oxygen, sediment settling, and the movement of nutrients. The lake is quiet, but not static. Its internal motions connect surface and depth, inlet and outlet, bank and center. The steps create the basin, but the basin itself shapes the water before sending it onward. Every pause in the Plitvice Lake steps is also a transformation. This transformation is gentle enough to resemble rest. The water arrives broken from a fall, carrying bubbles and movement. It spreads into depth, slows, clears, and reflects. By the time it reaches the outlet, it has become smooth again, ready for the next descent. The same pattern happens in the mind when a thought arrives bright and unsettled, then widens, softens, and passes. We continue along the shore, where the pool narrows between trees. The path is damp, and the wood underfoot would feel cool if you touched it. Moss grows along the edges. The sound of the next outlet is still faint, but growing. The air carries a light spray, even before the fall appears, as if the valley is sending its coolness ahead of the water. The fall comes into view as a series of pale ribbons over dark stone. Tufa has grown along the edge, but older limestone forms part of the surrounding structure. The water uses both, flowing over deposited terraces and carved rock. This combination gives the cascade texture. Some sections are smooth, others are broken. Some are green with moss, others glow pale under the clear sheet. At Plitvice, the underlying geology sets the stage, while tufa builds the active steps. The carbonate bedrock provides minerals and channels for groundwater. The spring water transports dissolved calcium carbonate. The surface environment allows deposition. The growing tufa barriers then reshape the hydrology by holding lakes. It is a layered process, but you can feel it simply as rock becoming water becoming rock again. You stand with me beside the ribbons, and the sound fills the shaded hollow. It is steady enough that the mind stops measuring it. Droplets rise as mist and settle on leaves. A thin branch trembles in the spray. The pool below is blue at the center, green at the edge, and white where the water lands. The colors move slowly, held by the constant fall. This is not spectacle in the restless sense. It is continuity made visible. The fall does what it has done before we arrived. The moss receives it. The tufa holds it. The pool clears it. The forest shades it. Our attention rests on it for a while, then lets it go. The Plitvice Lakes steps are especially suited to this kind of gentle attention because nothing demands a quick reaction. As we move on, the water's voice becomes softer again, and the path enters a quieter reach. The lake beside us is partly covered by shadow, and the reflections of trees are so dense that the surface seems almost like a dark woodland floor. Only the faint tremble of ripples reveals it as water. Near the edge, a submerged pale ledge gives the darkness a hidden brightness. That hidden brightness is tufa beneath the surface, continuing the stepped structure even where no fall is visible. It may mark an older rim, a submerged shelf, or a zone where deposition has thickened the margin. Lakes in tufa systems can hold many such features, some active, some inherited from previous flow patterns. The landscape keeps traces of older water paths inside its present calm. You may feel how this deepens the sense of time. The visible rim ahead is not the only step. Underwater shelves, abandoned channels, mineral-coated branches, and sediment layers all belong to the valley's memory. Plitvice is not a newly drawn line. It is a palimpsest of flows, though the word can drift away if it feels too waking. It is simply water remembering where it has been. The next outlet is quiet enough that we almost pass it before noticing. A shallow spill crosses a low tufa edge hidden by reeds. The water parts around stems and falls in small clear tongues into a narrow channel below. There is no foam at first, only a bright trembling. Then the channel turns over stones, gathers air, and begins to murmur more audibly. Small outlets like this help distribute the descent across the valley. They prevent the system from being only a series of dramatic drops. Instead, there are countless minor thresholds where water lowers itself by inches and small ledges. These places may be easy to overlook, but they are essential to the feeling of Plitvice because they keep the descent continuous, intimate, and unhurried. You can follow the narrow channel with your eyes as it slips between mossy banks. It carries little leaves, clear reflections, and invisible minerals. The water is shallow enough to reveal every stone, but quick enough to blur their edges. Sunlight appears briefly, then disappears under branches. The channel seems to speak in a lower voice than the falls, a private voice meant for anyone moving slowly enough to hear. That private voice tells the same story. Carbonate-rich spring water responds to air, life, and flow. Calcium carbonate returns to solid form. The growing deposits influence water paths. Lakes form where barriers rise. Ecosystems develop in the clear, oxygenated, terraced waters. The story is scientific, but its rhythm is almost musical, because every step repeats with variation, like a lullaby sung by a valley. And as the channel enters another lake, the music widens again. The surface spreads out, and the sound opens into space. A few rings move across the water where insects touch down. The far shore lies in shadow, with tree roots and limestone merging in the dimness. The lake feels older than the channel, though both are part of the same flow, both renewed by the same spring. The illusion of age comes from stillness. A calm surface seems ancient, while a stream seems newly made. Yet the lake is constantly receiving new water, and the stream may follow a path established long before. Plitvice gently unsettles these impressions. What looks still is moving. What looks temporary may be persistent. What looks like stone may have begun as living moss under clear flow. This is why the valley rewards half sleep. Its truths do not need to be held sharply. They can drift in and out, returning with each cascade. You may remember only the cool spray, or the pale tufa, or the way a blue-green pool holds a reflection. That is enough. The deeper understanding can settle underneath, like mineral grains on a quiet bed. We walk toward the far side of the lake, where the next rim catches more light. The overflow there is smooth, nearly silent, and spread across a broad shelf. It looks like clear glass moving over pale stone. The shelf ends in several rounded lips, each one releasing water in a different texture. Some flows descend as threads, some as curtains, some as beads under moss. The broad shelf may be an active depositional surface, especially where water remains thin and aerated. The pale color suggests carbonate deposition, though living films and algae may tint parts of it green or gold. As water crosses the shelf, it interacts with air over a wide area. The longer contact and textured surface create opportunities for mineral release, strengthening the step that shapes the lake above. You may sense how the step holds two kinds of time. The flowing sheet belongs to the present moment, always new, always replacing itself. The shelf beneath belongs to accumulated moments, built from countless passes of similar water. Present motion and stored motion meet there. The water you see now is temporary, but the shape it follows is made from the memory of previous flows. The descent over the shelf is so smooth that it seems like the lake is exhaling. Water leaves without strain. The pool below accepts without splash, except at the brighter drops. Mist rises only lightly. A coolness touches your face. The sound is a low, continuous hush, the kind that makes thoughts loosen at the edges and settle deeper into the body. We stay with that hush for a while, because Plitvice teaches through staying. The longer you listen, the less separate the sounds become. The fall, the pool, the leaves, the distant cascade, and the small drips from stone all join into one atmosphere. You may no longer track which water is where. You only feel the valley descending around you, step by step, breath by breath. And as we move lower again, the path turns toward a more open view, where several pale rims shine through the forest. The water connects them in silver threads. Each rim is a place where the spring's invisible cargo becomes a little more visible. Each pool is a place where movement relaxes into clarity. The Plitvice Lake steps unfold below us like a slow thought becoming a dream. From this open view, you can imagine the whole catchment feeding the system. Rain and snow on higher ground, water entering soil, underground flow through limestone and dolomite, springs emerging into streams, lakes forming behind tufa barriers, cascades aerating the water, moss and microbial life supporting deposition, forests protecting slopes and shade. Every part is necessary, but no single part is loud. This quiet interdependence is what gives the landscape its peace. It was not shaped by one sudden event, but by the long cooperation of ordinary processes. Water dissolves. Water carries. Water releases. Life grows. Stone gathers. Gravity guides. Time allows. The result is a staircase of lakes that feels almost intentional, though its maker is simply spring water doing what spring water can do in the right place. You may notice that the word shaped feels gentler than carved here. Carving suggests removal alone, a blade through material. Shaping includes both removal and addition, both dissolving and building. Spring water shaped the Plitvice Lake steps by taking stone from underground, returning it as tufa, and arranging the stream into pauses. It made the valley by giving, as much as by taking. The thought settles easily as we continue. A breeze moves across the open view and touches the lake surfaces one after another. Reflections blur. The waterfalls remain unchanged in their motion. Leaves shift softly above us. The air carries a mingled scent of wet stone, clear water, green shade, and old leaves. You feel the landscape through several senses at once, but none of them asks for effort. We descend toward the nearest of the shining rims. Up close, it is more irregular than it looked from above. The tufa surface bulges in rounded forms, dips into small channels, and supports patches of moss and low plants. Water chooses many routes across it. Some are strong enough to make white lines. Others are only glistening films moving over stone, almost silent. Those glistening films are important because precipitation often occurs where thin water sheets spread over surfaces and exchange gases with air. The contact is intimate. The water is shallow enough for light and air to matter. It is slow enough in places for minerals to gather, yet moving enough to refresh the chemistry. A film no thicker than a breath can participate in building a step over time. You can watch one film slip over a rounded tufa bump. It reflects the sky for a moment, then bends around moss and becomes textured with ripples. At the lower edge, it gathers into droplets. Each droplet falls into a dark pocket below. The pocket overflows into another thin stream. Nothing is wasted and nothing is hurried. The water explores every contour with care. Care is only a feeling we give it, of course, but the feeling helps us understand the effect. The spring water attends to every surface because it cannot do otherwise. It follows contact, gravity, and chemistry. It touches what lies in its path. It leaves traces where conditions allow. Over time, this exactness becomes tenderness in the landscape, a softness born from precise natural processes. The next pool is small and very clear. You can see the bottom entirely, from the incoming fall to the outlet. Pale tufa shelves step down beneath the water, and plants grow in the quieter corners. A few fish hover near the deepest spot, where green shade gathers. The pool feels like a chamber within the larger chain, a private pause between two brighter descents. Small pools like this can be especially revealing. Their scale lets you see inlet, basin, and outlet at once. You can trace how water enters with bubbles, slows over a deeper hollow, then exits over a lower rim. You can see where sediment rests and where current keeps the bottom clean. The whole logic of the Plitvice Lake steps is present in miniature. We linger there, and the pool's clarity begins to feel like a kind of silence. There is sound all around, but visually the water seems quiet enough to hold every small thing in place. A leaf on the bottom, a pale ridge, a fish's shadow, a thread of current. Your attention can sink into these details without strain, as if the lake were lowering a lamp inside the mind. And as the pool releases itself over the next rim, we follow the water into a slightly steeper section, where the cascades come closer together. The sound becomes more layered, but still smooth. One fall begins before the previous pool has fully quieted. Another appears just below. The valley descends in closer breaths here, like someone sleeping more deeply, with exhale following exhale in an even rhythm. In steeper sections, tufa barriers may create a dense sequence of small falls and pools. The vertical drop is divided among many thresholds, reducing the force of any single descent and spreading deposition opportunities across multiple surfaces. This division is central to the stepped appearance. Instead of a simple stream slope, Plitvice becomes a terraced system, each step a collaboration between water's downward pull and mineral growth upward. The closer cascades make the air feel more saturated. Spray hangs between them. Moss grows thick on every wet ledge. Limestone darkens where water seeps. The sound seems to come from all sides, though none of it is sharp. You can feel coolness at your temples and along your hands. The valley seems to close around the spring water, holding us inside its soft murmur. We pass slowly, because there is too much detail to rush. A narrow stream crosses under a moss arch. A tiny fall slips behind leaves. A pale shelf extends under clear water. Foam collects in a circular eddy, no wider than a basin, turning with patient regularity. Each detail could be its own small sleep story, but together they remain part of the same downward movement. The eddy is a good place to notice flow complexity. Water entering a pool does not simply move straight across. It turns, reflects from edges, spirals around obstacles, and slows in pockets. These motions influence where floating material gathers and where sediments settle. They also create varied habitats for small organisms. Even calm pools contain hidden motion, and that motion is part of the valley's subtle design. You can let your eyes follow the foam until it becomes almost hypnotic. Around and around, then outward, then gone. Another small piece enters and repeats part of the path. The eddy is temporary, maintained by the incoming current and the pool's shape. If the flow changes, it may vanish. For now, it draws a circle on the water, soft and white, then lets it dissolve. This dissolving circle echoes the larger cycles at Plitvice. Water dissolves limestone. Limestone reappears as tufa. Tufa shapes lakes. Lakes alter flow. Flow builds and wears tufa again. The cycle is not closed in a perfect ring, because water is always moving downstream, but it has a returning quality, a repetition of transformations that makes the landscape feel continuous beyond any single moment. As we leave the eddy, the cascades spread apart again, and the sound relaxes. The next lake is longer, stretching under a canopy of trees. Its far end is hidden by a bend, so the water seems to continue into green shadow without destination. The surface carries faint ripples from the inlet, but the far half is smooth, holding a long reflection of the wooded slope. A long lake allows the water more time to slow, clarify and exchange heat with its surroundings. It can support different zones, shallow margins, deeper channels, sunlit patches, and shaded reaches. The tufa barrier, at its lower end, determines its water level, while the basin's shape controls circulation. Each lake in the Plitvice chain is therefore a distinct environment, though all are linked by the same spring-fed descent. You may feel the difference as we walk beside this longer water. The pace seems slower, the falls are farther apart. The mind has more room to drift between sounds. A faint breeze crosses the surface and carries the smell of damp leaves toward us. The water near the bank is clear enough to show submerged grasses bending gently, all in the same direction, as if listening downstream. Downstream is always present, even in stillness. The outlet may be out of sight, but the lake is moving toward it. The Plitvice Lake steps give this feeling again and again, the sense of a hidden destination without urgency. You can rest beside the water because the water knows where it is going. It does not need your attention to guide it. At the bend, the far end of the lake appears, and with it, another pale rim. This one is partly shaded, partly sunlit, so the falling water alternates between brightness and green shadow. The effect is soft, like a curtain woven from light and leaf. The pool below is not visible yet, but its sound rises through the trees, rounded and constant. The rim may be growing at different rates along its length, depending on water distribution, moss cover, and exposure. Sunlit areas may support certain organisms more strongly. Shaded areas may remain cooler and host different communities. Flow concentrated in one part may increase aeration there, while slower seepage elsewhere supports damp moss. The barrier's surface is a mosaic, and the lake's future shape depends on that mosaic. You can see the mosaic as we approach. Pale carbonate crust, green moss, dark wet stone, clear water, white bubbles, brown leaves caught at the side. Each element has its place, and none feels decorative. The whole rim is functional beauty, made beautiful because it works, because it holds water, releases water, grows from water, and remains open to change. We stand near the sunlit portion, where the sheet of water is almost transparent. Under it, the tufa shows fine ridges like soft wrinkles. The flow slides over them and gathers in narrow lines. At the lower edge, it falls in a beaded fringe. The beads catch sunlight, brighten, and vanish into the green shadow below. You can almost feel the passage of each drop as a small cooling of the air. A beaded fringe increases the water's contact with air. The more the flow breaks into droplets, the more gas exchange can occur. This matters for carbonate precipitation because the balance of dissolved carbon dioxide influences whether calcium carbonate stays in solution or settles out. The cascade's beauty and chemistry are inseparable. What looks like sparkle is also part of the process that builds the step. This inseparability is one of the reasons Plitvice feels whole. Nothing is only visual. Color comes from depth, clarity, mineral surfaces, vegetation, and sky. Sound comes from flow shape, drop height, and rock texture. Coolness comes from spring water, shade, and evaporation. Stone comes from dissolved mineral, air exchange, and living surfaces. Every sensation has a process beneath it, and every process has a sensory face. As we move along the shaded portion, the fall becomes quieter. Moss thickens, absorbing some of the water's energy, and breaking the descent into hidden trickles. Droplets fall from green edges into small, dark hollows. The smell here is especially rich, mossy and mineral, with a faint sweetness from wet leaves. The light is low, and the water's white threads seem to glow inside the shade. The moss is not merely covering the tufa. In many places it helps create it. Water flowing through and over moss loses carbon dioxide, and mineral crystals can form around the tiny stems and filaments. As deposition continues, the moss may be coated, and new moss may grow outward on the fresh surface. The living edge advances and the stone follows, or perhaps they advance together. You can imagine this advancing edge over many quiet seasons. A green cushion stays wet from constant spray. Pale mineral gathers within it. The cushion thickens, stiffens, and extends the rim by a fraction. New growth colonizes the outer surface. More water crosses, more carbonate settles. The step grows not like a wall being raised, but like a shoreline of moss slowly turning into stone. And as we descend below that rim, the receiving pool opens in a small amphitheater of rock and trees. The fall behind us sends ripples outward, and the opposite wall reflects them back. The surface becomes a meeting place of gentle waves. They cross, soften, and disappear. Above the pool, leaves hang nearly still, each one brightened along the edge by moisture in the air. The amphitheater's shape influences sound, making the water seem rounder and nearer. Rock faces reflect the hush, vegetation softens the echo. The pool's surface adds a low shimmer of moving noise. Standing there in imagination, You can feel how geography shapes listening. The valley does not only guide water, it guides sound, coolness, light, and the way your body receives the place. The Plitvice Lake steps are therefore an acoustic landscape as much as a visual one. Each step has a voice determined by width, height, flow, texture, and surroundings. A high, narrow fall speaks differently from a low, mossy spill. A broad lake quiets the voice before the next edge. As we move downward, we are following a sequence of tones, each one lower in the mind. That downward toning helps the sleepward feeling. The senses are engaged, but gently. There is detail, but no urgency. There is change, but no surprise. The valley keeps offering familiar elements in new arrangements, giving the drifting mind enough to follow and enough repetition to let go. Water, tufa, moss, pool, shade, and spring return like soft words in a long whispered sentence. We leave the amphitheater through a narrow side of the pool, where the outlet slips between limestone blocks. The water deepens briefly, then shallows across a pale shelf. A few tiny fish move against the current, their bodies almost invisible until they turn and flash. The shelf carries the flow toward another edge, and the sound ahead is very low, like water being poured in another room. The limestone blocks may be part of the older bedrock framework, while the tufa shelf represents newer deposition. Their meeting gives the channel stability and texture. Water moves over both, dissolving here, depositing there, depending on chemistry and flow. In karst systems, old and new carbonate forms often share the same scene, reminding us that stone is not one single age or one single behavior. You can see oldness and newness touching under the clear water. The darker, heavier limestone seems patient in one way. The pale, porous tufa seems patient in another. The spring water touches both without preference, carrying history from one to the other. It is a gentle continuity, not a boundary. The Plitvice Lake steps are made where these ages meet under a moving, transparent skin. As the shelf lowers, the water spreads thin again. The sound becomes brighter. Light catches the moving film and scatters it into small flashes. The edge ahead is almost level, so the fall forms a long, delicate line. Below it, the next pool is shaded and green. The line of falling water looks fragile, but the process behind it is steady enough to shape centuries. Fragility and endurance coexist here. A droplet is temporary. A moss stem is delicate. A thin mineral film can break. Yet repeated droplets, moss growth, and mineral films build barriers strong enough to hold lakes. The valley's endurance arises from actions that seem small and easily overlooked. That is part of its quiet reassurance. Soft things repeated patiently can shape a lasting world. You may let that reassurance settle as we continue lower, following the long delicate line into shade. The pool beneath receives the fall with almost no foam. It is dark, calm and clear at the edges. A submerged log lies near the far side, coated in pale mineral on its upper surface. Around it, water plants wave slowly, and their shadows move over the lakebed like thin smoke. A mineral-coated log shows the intimate contact between forest and tufa formation. Wood offers a surface. Microorganisms colonize it. Water flows over it. Carbonate may precipitate, forming a crust that records the log's shape. Eventually the wood may decay, but the mineral coating can remain for a time. The valley turns temporary organic forms into part of its slow geological texture. This does not make the forest less alive. It makes the geology more alive in feeling. Trees grow, shed, fall, and enter the water. Water coats, carries, and transforms them. Moss grows on mineral edges, built around earlier life. New surfaces invite new communities. The Plitvice Lake steps are a place where life and stone do not simply stand beside each other, but continually exchange forms. We walk past the coated log in our imagination, letting it remain under the green water. The path turns away from the pool for a few moments, though the sound stays close. Through leaves you can glimpse flashes of white where the outlet begins. The ground smells darker here, the air is still, and the distant falls seem to pulse softly through the trees, though their flow is steady. The pulse may be only the effect of our movement along the path. as leaves and rocks open and close the sound. In landscapes like this, hearing changes with every step. A fall can disappear behind a trunk, then return wider around a bend. The valley edits the sound gently, giving us intervals of closeness and distance. The water continues unchanged, but our listening travels. Listening travels much like water does, finding openings, softening around obstacles, gathering where the valley lets it gather. You may hear the next cascade before you see it, and your mind prepares a shape. Then the shape appears differently than expected. Lower, wider, greener, more hidden. Plitvice keeps expectations soft. It lets each step be familiar without being fully predictable. And as we come around the bend, the cascade reveals itself across a mossy wall. It is not high, but it is broad, and water moves over it in countless narrow lines. The wall behind is tufa, porous and pale where exposed, deep green where moss has thickened. The water glides, drips, and falls all at once, making a sound like continuous soft rain. This kind of mossy wall is a beautiful expression of active deposition. Water remains spread across living surfaces. Carbon dioxide exchange occurs along thin films and droplets. Calcium carbonate settles within and around moss structures. Over time, the wall can build outward, creating a soft, rounded face rather than a sharp ledge. The cascade becomes both builder and ornament, though ornament is only the visible side of function. You can stand before it and let the fine rain sound fill the mind. No single stream dominates. The entire wall whispers. Droplets shine briefly on moss tips. Some fall straight down. Others run along stems before releasing. The pool below is dimpled everywhere, its surface alive with tiny impacts that still feel calm because they are so evenly distributed. The evenness is soothing. A sudden sound would wake attention, but this sound spreads itself thinly and continuously. It has texture without interruption. It covers thought the way mist covers leaves, not by force, but by contact everywhere at once. The Plitvice Lakes steps offer many such sounds, each one a different form of water lowering itself through green shade and mineral light. We move slowly along the base of the mossy wall, and the pool beside us narrows into the next outflow. The water there is filled with tiny bubbles from the rain-like cascade. They drift together near the surface, then separate as the current takes them. Some burst silently, others travel a little farther, carrying a faint silver brightness into the shaded channel. Bubbles are small signs of aeration, and aeration is central to the chemistry of these terraces. As water contacts air, gases exchange. Carbon dioxide can leave the water, encouraging calcium carbonate to precipitate under suitable conditions. Oxygen enters, supporting aquatic life. The visual softness of bubbles belongs to a larger process that keeps the system clear, living, and capable of building tufa. The shaded channel turns around a limestone shoulder. Its water is quieter than the wall behind us, but filled with the memory of falling. You can see bubbles clinging to submerged plants, bright points under the surface. The channel bed is pale in places, dark in others. A leaf drifts along one side and avoids the strongest current, moving as if guided by a slower thought. This slower side current may carry the leaf into a pocket where it settles. It may break down there, feeding microbes and small invertebrates. If mineral-rich water continues passing over it, parts of it may become coated, or it may be lifted by a future rise in flow and carried downstream. The valley does not assign one fate to such things. It offers possibilities within movement. We follow the channel to another pool, and the sequence repeats with just enough difference to feel new. The pool is oval, darker at the center, and edged by a pale tufa shelf on one side. The incoming water enters with bubbles, then clears. The outlet is hidden behind reeds. The sound from the previous fall remains audible, while the next one murmurs faintly ahead, making the pool feel suspended between two voices. Suspension is a recurring sensation here. Lakes hang between inlets and outlets. Tufa hangs between living moss and mineral stone. Springs hang between underground darkness and open daylight. The listener hangs between waking and sleep. Plitvice makes such thresholds feel natural, even comforting, because every threshold is softened by water. Nothing is abrupt. Every change is given a pool, a shelf, a ripple, or a veil. You can let your breathing become one of those softened thresholds. Inhale like a lake receiving spring water. Exhale like water crossing a rim. Pause like a pool clearing after a fall. The valley does not instruct this, but it suggests it through repetition. As we move beside the oval pool, the sound of water and the rhythm of breath can become almost the same. At the hidden outlet, reeds part slightly where the current passes. The water is darker under them, then brightens over a low tufa edge. It falls in short threads into a narrow run below. The reeds bend but do not break. Their roots hold the bank. Their stems slow the margin. They are not central to tufa growth in the way mossy cascades are, but they belong to the ecosystem that shelters the lakes. The ecosystem's quietness is easy to underestimate. Much of it occurs in small feeding, filtering, grazing, and decomposing. Insects use the water margins. Fish move through oxygen-rich channels. Microbes live on submerged surfaces. Plants stabilize banks and create shade. These lives are not dramatic, yet their presence helps maintain the conditions through which the spring water can continue its mineral work. We pass the reeds, and the narrow run carries us into a brighter section. The canopy opens, the water shines. A pale tufa bed under the stream reflects light upward, making the whole channel appear lit from below. The sound is thin and quick. It moves beside us like a silver ribbon, never loud, always leading downward toward another green basin. The brightness shows how mineral surfaces influence visual atmosphere. Pale carbonate reflects more light than dark organic sediment. In shallow clear water, that reflection can make channels glow. The glow is part of why Plitvice feels almost unreal at times, though the explanation is entirely physical. Clear spring water, pale tufa, and filtered sunlight combine to produce color that seems to come from within the stream. You may feel that inner light as a calm presence. It is not harsh. It does not break the shade. It simply lifts the water's color from beneath, showing stones, plants, and soft current lines. When the channel reaches shadow again, the glow fades gradually. The transition is slow enough that the eye accepts it, the way the mind accepts a dream changing shape. And as shadow returns, the sound deepens into the next basin, where the water widens and slows under trees. The far side is lined with limestone and moss. A low fall enters from the left, almost hidden behind branches. Another small stream joins from the right. Their waters mingle without any visible seam, becoming one lake surface with two remembered paths. Confluences like this can alter local chemistry and flow patterns, depending on the water sources involved. At Plitvice, many inputs are part of the same carbonate-rich system, yet each path may differ slightly in temperature, dissolved gases, and mineral content. When they join, the basin integrates them. The lake becomes a place of mixing, settling, and preparation for the next step below. The idea of mixing feels gentle here. Two streams meet, and neither keeps its separate outline for long. Their bubbles spread, their currents overlap, their temperatures slowly blend. Their dissolved minerals become part of one moving body. The lake does not need to mark the meeting. It simply holds it, and then sends the combined water onward when the outlet arrives. You can see the outlet at the far end. Bright under a lower branch, the lake narrows toward it. Leaves gather near the sides, while the center remains clear. A small fish moves upstream for a moment, then lets itself drift back into place. The water's surface trembles where the current begins to lean downward. The next tufa rim waits, pale and wet, just beyond the narrowing. We walk toward that rim with the same unhurried attention. The Plitvice Lake steps have taught us their pattern by now, but the pattern has not grown empty. Each threshold carries a different arrangement of water, moss, light, and stone. This one is shaded at the top, sunlit at the lower pool, so the falling water moves from green darkness into a brighter, warmer clearing. The temperature of the water itself likely remains cool, steadied by its spring-fed origin and shaded passage, but the air around the lower pool feels slightly warmer in the clearing. You can sense both at once. Coolness rises from the falling sheet. Sun-warmed leaves release a faint green scent. The pool below reflects open sky. The contrast is delicate, and the body receives it as ease. The fall here is medium in height, enough to create a fuller sound. It drops over a rim thick with tufa, then breaks on a lower ledge before entering the pool. That lower ledge catches some of the flow and sends it sideways, creating a fan of fine streams along the wall. Moss grows thick where the fan stays wet, and the wall seems softly feathered with water. A lower ledge like that can become an active depositional surface if conditions remain favorable. Water spreading sideways increases wetted area. While moss and microbial films provide attachment points, the ledge may grow outward, altering the fall's shape in future years. What we see as a beautiful fan is also a place where the cascade is slowly editing its own path through mineral deposition. You can watch the fan as if it were breathing. Water arrives from above, spreads, thins, and gathers again. Droplets form along moss tips. Threads brighten in the sunlit clearing. The sound is full near the main drop and softer along the side, giving the fall a layered voice. The pool below receives both voices, stirring near the ledge, calming toward the center. The calming center is blue-green and clear. It holds a few floating leaves, spaced widely apart. Each leaf turns slowly, then drifts toward the outlet side. Their movement reveals a broad, gentle circulation. The incoming fall pushes water outward. The basin curves it around, and the outlet draws it onward. The lake's stillness is therefore patterned, and the pattern is visible only through things light enough to follow it. This is why watching leaves can be so restful. They show movement without demanding speed. They make invisible currents visible in a soft language. A leaf does not explain hydrology, yet it lets you see where the water wants to go. At Plitvice, even the smallest floating thing can become a guide through the stepwise descent, pointing quietly toward the next pale rim. And as we leave the clearing, the path returns to shade, and the water continues beside us with a lower voice. The valley feels deeper now, not because we have traveled far in a dramatic sense, but because repetition has settled into the body. The lakes, falls, rims, and mosses have become familiar companions. You may feel as if you have always been walking slowly beside this spring-fed chain. The Plitvice Lake steps invite that feeling of long companionship. They are ancient in mood, active in process, and intimate in detail. You can return to any part of them in memory and find the same elements waiting: clear water over pale tufa, green moss in spray, cool air under trees, and the continuous descent of a stream that has learned how to rest while moving. Ahead, the next pool lies partly hidden, and only a strip of water is visible through the trunks. It is dark green, almost still, with a narrow silver line at its outlet. We move toward it without hurry. The sound of the clearing fall fades behind us. The new outflow grows clearer, and between the two, for a few breaths, the valley holds us in a soft interval of shade and listening. The hidden pool opens only when we are close enough to hear its edges. Water slides in from shade, crosses a pale tufa shelf, and settles into green stillness under leaning trees. The air is cool against your face, and the scent of wet limestone rises softly from the bank. The Plitvice Lake steps have brought the spring water here with no hurry, letting each ledge, each mossy rim, and each quiet basin lower the valley by a little more patience. At the far side, the final visible spill is small and low. It does not ask for attention. It simply lets the pool loosen over its edge in a clear, thin sheet, bright for a moment before it joins the darker water below. The sound is almost a whisper now, softened by leaves and distance, and the spray is only a faint coolness in the air, like the last touch of rain after a storm has already passed. The tufa beneath the flow keeps receiving what the spring has carried from the hidden rock. A little carbon dioxide leaves the water, a little mineral settles. Moss holds the surface open to the stream. Nothing here is finished, and nothing needs to be finished tonight. The valley continues its quiet work without needing us to watch, building and wearing, holding and releasing in the soft language of water. You can let the last pool grow still in your mind. The reflections settle. The leaves stop turning. The pale stone under the surface fades into green shadow, and the falls behind us become only a distant hush. Spring water moves on through Plitvice, but you can rest here, beside the low rim, where the steps have grown quiet, and the forest listens. The water slips over the edge, and the valley is still.